Hello, Cinphomaniac. This is Marcus, and I'm here to just give you a special message at the top of the pod that's releasing on a Sunday here. This one is from the archive, and it is our episode covering and discussing the 1963 film The Servant. We originally recorded this back in April. We are releasing it now. We didn't have a usual episode new release for Friday this week. A reason for that, there's a few, but one of them was a lot of my personal media consumption and attention span was being focused elsewhere. And one of the things that's going to come out of that is a special 2-part podcast I'm going to be doing with just me, no Dana, covering the release of the final Evangelion movie, Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0. And if you don't know what that is, well, you'll find out soon when I release the first part, which is actually just kind of an extensive explanation and recap of the franchise so far. If you're interested, if you've never seen it and are not super concerned with spoilers and are just curious, like, what the hell is this? This is a great little way for you to jump in. And then that's going to be followed up by my actual sort of review, discussion, breakdown, thoughts, all that on the actual film, which as of this recording, I've already watched 3 times. So yeah, still trying to parse through my thoughts and feelings on it. Hint, I liked it a lot. But yeah, so with that in mind, you're going to be looking out for the release of that. I'm not sure if I'm going to put it on the normal podcast feed, the audio podcast feed you'd find on Apple or Spotify, just to kind of keep a little bit of separation here, since this is not a usual episode and we don't have the Patreon launched yet, nor would I want to paywall this. But you will likely find it on our YouTube. So if you subscribe to Cinphomaniac's YouTube page, which I highly recommend you do, you will find a video that's really just audio of the first part, which is that explanation video, and then a second part will be the review, and that'll be coming up either today, Sunday, or on Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday, Dana and I will record a new episode as usual, and that should go up on Friday. So that's just a little housekeeping to kind of get everybody's heads in mind with what's going on. And without further ado, here is our episode on The Servant. Cinphomaniac is full of spoilers. If the movie's there in the title, we're probably going to say everything that happens in it. So don't fucking listen if you don't want to know.
Can I get you anything, sir?
No. No.
Oh, and hot in here. Oh, isn't it? So hot.
Your skirt's too short.
A what? That's how all the girls are wearing them. Well, that's how they all wear them. What? You think it's too short? You hot?
To me, the great hope is just people who normally wouldn't make movies are going to be making them. And, suddenly one day some little fat girl in Ohio is going to be the new Mozart, and make a beautiful film with her little father's camera. To me, the great hope is girl in Ohio is going to be the new Mozart. To me, the great hope is people who normally wouldn't make movies are going to be making them. To me, the great hope is Ohio is going to be the new Mozart. To me, the great hope is people who normally wouldn't make movies are going to be making. To me, the great hope is one day some little fat girl in Ohio is going to just be Mozart. Normally wouldn't make movies in Ohio is making them in Mozart. Just people who normally wouldn't make Mozart and be making. To me, the great hope girl in Ohio is going to make a Mozart beautiful film with her little father's camera recorder and For once, the so-called professionalism about moving Mozart destroyed forever, and it'll really become an art form. That's my opinion.
Great. We got a lot to talk about with this, but
we really do.
Yeah, you said it. In all caps, I have thoughts, which got me very excited because I just like one of the things about this movie is, and the film we're talking about is The Servant. One of the things about this film is that I really am jealous, and I recently showed it to Yannick for the first time a couple months ago. But I'm really jealous for people who've never seen it before because, like, the movie really is quite, and I mean, this is my opinion. You can tell me if you disagree with this, but, like, the movie is quite good at not letting you know where it's going, even though it's full of hints and clues all throughout.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to say. The first, typically scripts, this better than I do.
Yeah.
But your first 20 minutes in, something's got to happen.
Right.
And then the second 20 minutes is your second, it's usually about every 20 minutes you have some kind of story, some kind of major plot happening, something happening. So 20 minutes pass in this movie and I'm like, okay, where is this going? So then I think this whole movie just about the fiance not liking the new servant, like them just not getting along. Exactly, I'm like, okay, so this is really weird. So it's just this movie about a fiance not liking the servant. First of all, then I'm like, but why doesn't she like him? Because he's actually kind of a dope servant. Like he's doing a really good job. He like brings us, I'm like, why don't you like this guy? He like brings your boyfriend, your fiance, some like hot water for his feet. I'm like, yeah, if my fiance had a butler that did that, I'd be like, cool, stick around. Where's my bowl for my feet also? And like, I would be cool with it. But you do start to see that the tension and that they hate each other. And I guess when I went through the movie, when I saw the end in hindsight, I did think differently. But I thought differently in the sense that I was like, oh, she may have sensed that he was trying to take control and she had control initially. I'm in charge, right? And then here comes this servant barking orders, stepping on my toes, moving my flowers that I put there. Don't touch them. That was one of the things where I was like, ooh, this is contentious because she put the flowers down on this table, right? And literally his hand is like about to touch the vase to move it. And she doesn't even look in his direction. And she says, leave them there. Or like, don't touch them or something like that. And I'm like, oh, she didn't even look. She just knew instinctively that he was going to move them.
I love that. I love that bit. That's like, again, that's just such great everything, writing, character, acting, is the making a moment like that work where it's just like, because you, the audience, knows it too, and you're not thinking the characters are on the same wavelength than they are,
Right. And the main thing, I was talking about the catalyst in the beginning. The thing that struck me as, oh, well, this must be the main event of the first, third of this film is when the servant walks in on them kissing, fully clothed, just dramatic open mouth fish kissing. And she wants him thrown out because he walked in on them kissing. Yeah. And I'm like, first of all, he didn't even, he said he knocked. I didn't hear the knock, but he said that he knocked, and y'all have your clothes on. Why are you so upset that he's coming to give you something and be of service? Because I think he was bringing some tea or some snacks or some tray of something, right? He was bringing them something. So you're so pissed that he just walked in on you when he knocked and he's bringing you something. I'm like, why does she hate him so much? Because she thinks he's trying to take over. And now he's interrupted their kissing. So now he's trying to get in the way of their relationship by interrupting the kissing with the clothes on.
I just want to jump in and say, because you're pointing it out, it's just interesting. We're going to talk a lot more about this when I unpack it later. But like, the thing is, like, this movie came out in 1963. And obviously, as you know, it goes so much further than the scene you're talking about with the clothed kissing. But like, even that was pretty transgressive for the time. So it's
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
it's lulling you into like, oh, this is pretty transgressive. And then it goes way further than that. But
Yeah.
like, it just like, that's so just, I just wanted to point that out real quick.
So something that sure. Something that I want to get all my stuff out of the way because this is one of your faves and I want to know what you think, but not because if I know what you think, it might alter what I think.
No, I agree. I want you to keep going because like almost everything you're mentioning, I have more to say on, but I want you let you kind of go through it.
So timeline wise, I'm not as great with like history of cinema timeline. So I'm not sure if this falls before or after Hitchcock. But
like during really like
during
it's after a lot of his biggest movies. This is after Psycho, but like
this is after Psycho. Okay, so I thought it felt
I'm pretty sure.
It felt to me just the cinematography had had some nods to Hitchcock in the shadow play. Oh, there was a lot of shadow play in the beginning of this movie, and then probably my favorite camera work in the movie, which
Psycho is 60, so it's after that. There's a few
after
a few of them,
I definitely felt a vibe of his when they do some shadows on the wall that are hard shadows. It made me think of Hitchcock, obviously, and then something else that I really enjoyed that they did a couple of times through the movie, and I don't know if this was maybe a new trend or I hadn't seen it here before, but the mirror shots. In this movie, there are a lot of shots in the mirror, some of which the main action is happening in the mirror, which I thought was very cool, super interesting. And at the time, probably kind of a modern way of shooting, like modern cinematography. Like we're not going to just show it happen.
Unique. It's pretty unique.
I'm going to show this. And then there's like I think my favorite one is one of the scenes toward the end and they're in like a round mirror. And that kind of adds to the feeling of what's going on here. Something's not right. It's a little uneasy. And I think that you get that feeling because they're shooting in kind of a fish-eyed mirror. And it makes you realize that like something here is not quite right. This is not real. What's happening here. And then you're finding out that, spoiler alert to anyone who hasn't seen this movie from 1968. The maid is not his sister. The maid is not his sister. And that leads you down to a whole nother path of like, okay, so this whole thing was just a ruse to get him and his girlfriend a job together. Right. And which part of me is like, why wouldn't you just say like, my fiance is also a maid and it would really help us out if you could give her a job. Also, if you like the job that I do. I don't know why that would have been so hard for him to do unless he was planning on getting his fiance, sister, girlfriend involved in this whole loosey-goosey makeout sessions. And he's like, well, if he thinks that she's my fiance, he'll probably be respectful. But if he thinks she's my sister, he might try to make a move thinking that I don't have any stake in her relationships as much. And maybe he'll be more open to us introducing things to him, using him for his money, getting him to buy stuff. Who knows what his plan was going to be at that point. But I was kind of like, wait, what? Because they actually picked two actors who look very similar. Like if you look at those two actors, I actually am like, oh, they did a really good job casting siblings because they have similar eyes and face shape and structure.
Wait, can I interrupt to say, because you're right about this, but like I'm not going to tell you right now. Save this for when it comes up in my own sort of response. But I'll just give you a little hint. I have a theory. This is just a theory. It's not provable as far as I know, and I've done a lot of research on this movie. They are brother and sister. It's like they're not is the lie. But
that's so creepy.
Yeah. I'll explain all my reasoning for why I say this. But
okay.
Yeah, but I'll just throw it out there because like you're pointing out, oh, they did a good job casting them as siblings. I'm like, I think that's because they were casting siblings.
Yeah. Whoa, that does change things a bit.
This movie, I think what you're going to find with my response is that this movie is a lot darker than even you think it is.
It's darker than I think it is. Yeah. I mean, Vera's got great taste in men, I have to say, because above her bed is all those bodybuilder guys. from the 60s. She has all the, and I'm like, okay, first of all, you're a maid. You just got this job, right? You're going to tape some naked men, some bodybuilder guys above your bed.
I got some notes about this too.
Like that's kind of out there, right? To me, I'm like, okay, I understand like putting your, I had NSYNC posters and Backstreet Boys posters in my room. They weren't above my bed and they had shirts on, but like, I just thought that was such an interesting choice for her to have all of these, like there's like 6 or 7 of these muscly guys above her bed. And then, the master of the house, I never remember his name, the blonde guy.
Tony.
So
they never say his name. I just know his name from the credits. No, they never
I didn't
do.
hear them say it
It's
much,
Tony.
or not enough that I remembered it. But so
it's
Tony
literally
goes to
never said. I'm
Vera's-
pretty sure.
Okay, good. I'm not.
It's and maybe once in the scene where they go to the country house and there's those other character, the other like Lord Lady character.
Oh,
I think maybe they say it at one point. But like that, that's the only scene I can think of where it would have even been said. And maybe one time Vera says his name, but like I think for the most part, his name's not said. It is Tony though, and which is such a funny little goofy name. It makes sense, little Tony. I have a lot to say about this character, all the characters. But
there's so
go
much
ahead.
to say about Tony. But
I've had like I think I first saw this movie would have been probably 2009, like because it was I would have been my first semester at NYU, and I'm pretty sure. So like I've had a long time to marinate on this movie, and I mean I had to write about it even then, and so like I had to like study it pretty strongly. But like it's still amazing the things I notice and think about it now compared to what I would have what I picked up on then. Like,
well, I'm curious where you stand on. I'm going to call them the Tonyisms of the movie because Tony is so dramatic with stuff. He puts himself in timeout all the time. Have you noticed that? If he gets stressed or dramatic, he just puts his head up. He puts his face on a wall and just like stays there for a second. And I'm like, that's kind of a weird thing for an adult to do, to act, but it's like childish. It's a childish move.
Yes.
To like deal with.
He's a man child.
He's a man baby.
This is by the way, we'll get into this.
The man child thing is
the
super
concept
well
of a man child is a relatively recent concept, but like the Pinter script and Losey's direction, James Fox's portrayal, kind of like hone in on it.
Yeah, because he needs the man to clean up.
The entire movie's about being a man child.
Yeah, he can't take care of himself at all. He needs a servant to do everything for him, including, I guess, push his life in a direction because he's just there. Like, I guess I'm going to marry this girl, but I'm not really happy about it. It's like, fine. I'm like, fine with it. So he puts himself in timeout a number of times, which I was like, okay, this is a very odd behavior. I understand you when you're upset and you need to be alone, but physically putting your face and your nose, either he does it on a table, I believe once, and then he does it on a wall a couple of times. He just puts himself in timeout. So the other thing I thought was super weird is like, he goes to, the other Tonyisms besides putting himself in timeout, smelling Vera's old sheets with her bodybuilders above. I'm like, you're creepy, dude. You're creepy. Like, who's just gonna smell her sheets and she's not there anymore? What else did I put that was so creepy? Oh, so I described his character in my notes. I think about the way he behaves and kind of where this movie ends. Toward the end of the movie, I start thinking, oh, so he's the OG poor man's Armie Hammer. I'm glad that got such a big laugh.
I've been trying to avoid saying his name for like a while now.
No, you haven't.
Record.
Come on.
I have been trying to actively avoid saying his name. Like when we talked about Justice League, I didn't want to mention his name because he was supposed to play Batman in that movie. I'll finally answer that question for. Yes,
I didn't know
that's
he was
talking about.
Tapped for Justice League.
Because I just didn't even want to get into the Armie Hammer discussion. So
our listeners and people of America know the controversy, and I just think, especially because with Armie Hammer's situation, it was well known that his grandfather and father had these kind of tendencies to be sexually deviant or like not the norm and have these big lavish parties. And so at the end of this movie, I was like, is this guy Army's granddad? And this is just the beginning. And it's all the servant's fault that Army got into all this stuff.
Well, yeah, it's also
to his family, and now
it's also for
it.
me, like even especially with what you're talking about, like I have I'll have to give it to you so you can read sometime. But like I have a script that kind of goes into some of these things and my own versions of that. So like I'm kind of like let me I'll save my kind of perspectives honestly on that. But I'm gonna talk about it in the context of this movie for sure. Which yeah, so that's maybe a good place for me to kind of step in.
Yeah, I definitely thought that it was really interesting that it was like, oh, look at these wild swinger kissing parties. And that's all that it was. Like,
yeah.
I don't see it. Like, I don't see a lot of the depravity that you would expect, but I'm starting to really try to remember, like at the time that wasn't
show certain things.
At the time, that was an orgy. Right.
Yes.
That was the interpretation
I'll skip to
of
say
an
that.
orgy.
Yes. The idea here, because if you listen to Barrett's dialogue, it's very specific. This is what they've been doing now every night for a while, and they're going to still do it tomorrow night, like after the movie ends. He literally tells the girl, come back tomorrow. And well, I won't say what he says after that because it gets into something I didn't introduce yet. But, yeah, so like this is their life now. Like this is Barrett's ultimate end goal has been achieved, and it's like basically I'm the lord of these like goth orgies. That's basically his thing. And
yeah, and he's got
the meaning behind this. I'll get to too.
He's got Tony to pay for everything.
He's got Tony to pay for everything. But I almost it gets to the point where it's like. I almost wonder to what extent Barrett even needs actual money, or even like it's interesting. I'll get to like I'll explain Barrett, but I want to do it piece by piece because I think I'm going to blow your mind because I was listening very carefully to everything you said, and just so you know, I think you get an absolute A on your report there. You get an A. You get an A. You get an A. But the A+ would have been, and I didn't expect this. I didn't think it was possible for anyone to get on their own. I would have never gotten it on my own. Certainly not on a first watch. Like this was something that, fucking because of being able to read about the script and talk about it in a class, and then also having decade plus to watch it many times. Mm-hmm. I'm like, it's so hard to not see now that this is like very intentional. But I mean, then there's something I'm gonna get into too, just not even just about this movie, but the nature of this movie and why it's so rewarding and why it's one of my favorites. Cause like, honestly, most of my favorite movies have this in common. I mean, it's kind of like, to me, like a requirement for me to be really invested in a movie. Mm-hmm. It has to be one of those movies where you could watch it a million times and you're going to notice new things every time you watch it. And the reason for that,
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. The reason for that often is like, every single detail. And in this movie, this is especially true because I think there are movies that I would include in this category that are maybe a little bit more improvised or loose. Every single thing in this movie is meticulously placed there for a reason. I'm really glad you noticed the mirrors. That's a very important motif, but like it's everywhere in the thing. Like every single room in that house has a mirror in it.
They all have
and
mirrors.
You see them all. They're all used very particularly in certain shots, sometimes very dramatically in a way that like you'd have to be blind not to notice. But like there's a lot of meaning and intention behind that. But that's really just like the key to teach you that every single thing has a ton of meaning to it. Like every single little gesture, every single word in the dialogue. Because that's the thing. This script written by Harold Pinter is like immaculate script writing. I mean, Harold Pinter, if you have, I'm wondering if you have heard of him because you're an actor.
I don't think I have. I don't know.
Well, his plays are very like, I feel like that must be like something that acting classes go over all the time.
Which plays has he written?
That's the thing. I'm not a theater person, so I don't know the names of them off the top of my head. But
let me look, because maybe I've heard of his. I'm the worst at remembering writers and directors' names, but I'm really good at like if I've seen the play or seen the movie.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Harold.
You'll look him up. He has a cameo actually in this movie, like appearing in the restaurant scene, which I want to talk about too. But
he won a Nobel Prize.
yeah, he's incredibly prolific. Like this guy, this is the first screenplay he ever.
Oh
wrote.
my gosh, he wrote Sleuth. Yes, I'm a fan of this person. Sleuth is one of my favorite movies. The French Lieutenant's Woman, amazing.
I actually haven't seen these that you're naming, but like
you haven't seen Sleuth?
No,
Marcus!
I don't think so.
With God, what's his name? My favorite. No, the old British guy that I love so much. Michael Caine.
Oh no, yeah, no, I haven't seen this.
Michael
movie.
Caine did the original Sleuth. I believe there was a remake with Jude Law. It's amazing. You would absolutely love it because it does play on relationships and power struggles. I really think that it's maybe we should watch this one next.
Well, maybe that's next week, but I'll just say this. I mean, that makes sense because I mean that's what this movie is about. It's very along the line.
It's very like now that I know that he wrote The Servant and Sleuth, I'm like, okay, that this makes sense because it is along the lines of The Servant, but it's a much different way in Sleuth. But it's very similar tropes and it's shot really well and it's super well acted. I mean, honestly, in my opinion, I think Michael Caine's like top 5 actors of all time. And I think he wrote the most accessible book on acting that there is. Like I've read Stanislavski, I've taken Ivana Chubbuck, I went to Stella Adler for 4 years. Like I've studied a lot. And I have to say, I don't think I have retained or used the information given as much as I have with Michael Caine's book. He gives you just a very accessible way to think about acting where you get out of your own head about it. It's very impressive. Anyway, Michael Caine, Sleuth, have to watch it now because Harold Pinter apparently wrote it. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, no. So I'm going to get to this. I've been going on a deep dive into the other related movies to this film, but the Sleuth did not come up in it yet. So that's a good pick. But yeah, from what I understand and what I've now seen with some of these other films and stuff is, the way he writes in particular and the way Losey directs is also very incredibly important, obviously, to this whole thing. And that's why they're just such perfect collaborators is every single word. It's not just every word. It's every word that's not there. It's like how he uses the unsaid is incredibly like, that's kind of like what I've read is that that's kind of is his trademark across his work is the emphasis on the unsaid.
A lot of implications. Yeah.
Yeah. So which is why you get to crazy things that I'm going to mention once we get into it. But yeah, so really where I want to start with all this, because you said a lot of things I definitely want to respond to, but I'm gonna get through them in time because what so in the last week since I knew we were going to talk about this, I was like, I've already seen The Servant a bunch of times, so I'll probably watch it once before we talk. But really, I want to spend the week because the other reasons I just signed it is because right now on Criterion, like the sort of just miracle of Criterion Channel, honestly, is at its peak right now with what they've added in April. And I've been really enjoying it. Yeah. So they have a whole playlist for Dirk Bogarde, who's the guy who plays Barrett, the servant.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, I can't tell you like my reaction to this because so The Servant, like I said, it's a film I saw in college, a decade ago. But like even then, it was like a rare film. Like that was like the privilege of having to be like shown,
being able to see it. Yeah,
I wouldn't have been able to. I would have never heard of it probably otherwise. Like it's a movie that like film buffs know and everyone knows is great, but like it's not well seen. It's not like regularly released. No, I agree with you. I
had never been exposed to it, and obviously I'm a fan of the director. Now I know who Harold Pinter is. Like I am a fan of his other works and I've never heard of this.
Yeah. It's what we call a hidden gem. Right. So, so I think it's, and it's the fact that I got to watch 10 years ago is why it's been great for me because it's been able to have a profound impact on everything I've worked on it. And you know what I mean? So like I've had the privilege of having it always be a part of me for so long. But even for me, it's been unaccessible. Like I have like a bootleg copy is how I've been able to watch it for most of these years because the Blu-ray doesn't exist, blah, blah, blah.
It's not available anywhere.
It's not available.
Been remastered.
So,
had it been remastered?
No. It got remastered for this now recently. But
yeah, it looked great. I thought it looked fantastic.
Looks fantastic. And I mean, this is really important. I mean, this film is got masterful cinematography, which we'll get to too. So I hadn't been able to watch it, let alone really had a sense. Like I knew of some films that I'll mention, but like of the body of work of particularly the film star Dirk Bogarde and like how his body of work, The Servant, is like at the center of it in so many ways. And like this guy is one of those guys who's not only just like an absolute genius actor and a really important figure in actor history, which I'll get to.
Is he related to Humphrey?
No. Spelled
they just happened to have
spelled differently. I was like in my head when I bring this up, what Dana will ask this question.
That's exactly what I would ask. Is Humphrey around?
No, it's spelled differently. It's totally unrelated as far as I know. I mean, maybe they're like third cousins.
I love that you knew I would ask that.
Well, I just knew it was inevitable. So, no, it's good for everyone to be clarified on these things. So the wealth of his body of work, now they have a whole collection. So even though I haven't watched nearly all the films yet, I just have this increased awareness of it. And I did a bunch of research on it, and I'm so excited to basically watch all these movies, including some that are on the list that I was aware of that I've been meaning to watch. And now they're easily available to me, and I'm definitely going to.
I wonder if Sleuth is on there. I bet it is. It's especially the original one with Michael Keaton.
Is Dirk Bogarde in it? Because it's not on that list, but it might be on Criterion and it's part of some other collection or whatever. I haven't looked it up.
So like I said, I think it's been remade. And in the original, Michael Caine plays the younger man. And in the remake, he plays the older man. But Michael Caine is in both movies, I believe.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say that they did have a Harold Pinter specific collection.
1972, screenplay by Anthony Schaefer, but I guess it was originally written.
Yeah, it might be adapted from a play written by him.
Yes, it's originally adapted by the play. So it's Laurence Olivier and Michael Caine.
Gotcha.
And the original one. We have to watch this. It's from 1972.
We will. You have my word on it. But hold on. So I want because like I want to cover some of this research I did because you'll find it fascinating. So yeah, there's a whole wealth of these films now, including the other collaborations, or at least one of the other collaborations with Losey and Pinter as director and writer, respectively. Right. So I'm just like, but just to paint the picture, like they have this gambling collection on there that's really awesome. That's got, like Cassavetes films and Hard Eight and House of Games. And these are films I've been watching, but for Bogarde, right. I'm just like looking at this and it's so obvious just even from the films I watched, but also the descriptions of the other films I haven't seen and the trailer they have for the collection. This guy has a type that he plays. He has a very specific type that he plays that he's better at than anyone, basically. And there's like two kind of subsections because one thing you'll notice is a crude way of putting his type is because you'll know there's multiple movies where he plays this. He usually either plays a con artist or a Nazi.
Okay.
and almost all of them, there's sexual themes, particularly relation, and this is important to him, the man, which I'm about to get into. He plays a lot of characters that have like either homoerotic overtones or are straight up gay characters, closeted, and any number of things. And that's likely to do with the fact that the man, Dirk Bogarde himself, was, from everything we can understand, a closeted gay man. And like, this is kind of like, I mean, because you probably know some of this stuff, but like to paint the context of this at the time, like in the UK particularly, because he was an actual Brit, like living there and making movies there, it was like illegal, like straight up illegal to be gay. Like if you were caught, would go to jail. You would go to jail and likely worse because judges would recommend things like medical castration in some cases. And I'm sure you might know about this.
The shock treatments and all those stuff they did in America.
one of the most famous or infamous, I should change to say, infamous examples of this happening to somebody was Alan Turing, of the Turing test and imitation game and all that stuff. The AI computer science pioneer, guy literally was responsible in a lot of ways for stopping the Nazis' takeover of Europe. And how is he repaid by his country? They find out he's gay, arrested, offered medical castration as his only way out. Yeah, it's horrible, truly horrifying. So there was serious consequences for him being gay, but which is why he never came out. And even after laws and attitudes changed, because he didn't die till 99. This is something I read on the wiki, but it's interesting because he was friends with Helena Bonham Carter, and she was saying, like, when I talked to him, it was basically like he just always kind of felt like, if I come out now, it's almost like I'm just like admitting to being some kind of coward back in the day or something, and he just didn't sit right with him. So he never did officially, but like everyone just recognizes it now because he had the same partner for his entire career. Wow. He was another actor, was also his manager. So he was a very loyal, faithful guy. And it's a guy whose name was Anthony Forwood. And it's a real shame. Like he died in 88, Forwood, and then Bogarde died 11 years later in 99. So this guy put a lot on the line, but thankfully he, at least starting around the 1960s, pretty much throughout the rest of the remainder of his career, once he was like, okay, I'm not going to transition over to Hollywood where it'll be even worse. I'm just going to do like cool European art films in England and France and Italy and Germany. And once he committed to that, he was basically like, yeah, I'll be the guy that will play like the sort of risque, like closeted story or like the transgressive story. And eventually like, I'll be the guy to play Nazis for some reason. I'll be the go-to not like, if you want a quote, sympathetic or whatever Nazi, I'm your guy. Like it's wild. It's wild. So specifically the films with the Nazi stuff. Wait, hold on. Yeah. Is The Damned. There's this movie, The Damned, where he plays a Nazi. And then there's that's a Visconti film. And then there's The Night Porter, which is a film that's been on my list to see for a long time, where he plays a Nazi who it gets in a S&M style romance with a woman he used to torture as a Nazi. Like, so it's like after the war. It's
what?
It's wild. And like the poster for this movie, like the actual poster from like the late 70s when it came out, was like the most controversial movie ever. So they were trying to on purpose be like as like divisive as possible. So I'm like, yeah, that's my name all over it. I want to see it. I want to see it. I want to see how far they go with it. But yeah, so this guy, in other words, just off of that alone, this guy is like an icon of like what I would call like a transgressive, like we're going to fucking push the boundaries kind of cinema. And the other track of that is his sort of con artist, loosely differs from movie to movie, but like there's almost always some degree of like homoerotic or like bi-curious or straight up I'm a closeted person overtone. The one time he did like a more straight up like this is a kind of gay activism sort of movie, or two of them was really there's this film Victim, which I have not seen, where he literally plays like a guy who's like under the threat of the British law and being blackmailed for being gay. And then there's the film Death in Venice, which is more, again, I haven't seen this either, but from what I gather is more of like this like, oh, I'm like a retired composer in Vienna. There's this beautiful boy and I'm just in love with him type of movie. But then it's cool. And he also worked around during the same, after The Servant, but he worked with John Schlesinger, who's another British director who's noted as being someone who's a gay man and like kind of pioneered gay cinema. He's the guy who directed Midnight Cowboy. I don't know if you've seen that.
I have not seen it, but I'm aware of it. I just haven't watched it.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about Midnight Cowboy at some point because it's also one of my favorite movies. It's amazing with Dustin Hoffman and Jon Voight. And that film, I mean, I don't consider that movie remotely a gay film, but like some people do. And at the time it was, people were like, there's homosexual acts depicted in this movie. It has to be rated X. Like that. There's a whole funny history with that. It's really nothing. But it's a great film. And so he made this other film, which I don't know if you've seen. I've never seen it. Justice directed a film called Darling in, I think, 1964 with Julie Christie. And that film was like kind of his like crossover hit film that like blew up in Hollywood and got a bunch of Academy Award nominations. And unfortunately, Bogarde, who was in the film, did not get nominated for an Academy Award. But like, I bring it up to say that like Bogarde, when you look up The Servant, and we'll talk about it with everybody, like The Servant got completely ignored by the Academy Awards, but for the BAFTAs, got nominated in every single major category and won a few of them. Like it was like well celebrated in England. Like people were like, this is the peak of British cinema. And it absolutely was. Like, all the actors got nominated: director, screenplay, cinematography, production, everything. So, it's a shame it wasn't recognized elsewhere. Bogarde won for The Servant, by the way. So he won his BAFTA for Best Actor for it. So, good on him. But yeah, so now the last part before I get directly in The Servant, I want to talk about these two films that I watched that starred Bogarde from this list. They're kind of an interesting pair, I realized after watching them both. The first film I watched is this film Accident. And this is kind of the follow-up to The Servant, because this is Joseph Losey directing. We're going to talk a little bit more about who he is in a moment. Harold Pinter writing, and Dirk Bogarde as the star again. And this was in 1967. And this is another incredibly provocative movie in ways that are almost like more pronounced now, I feel like, or for different reasons than it would have been then. I think it was probably
for different reasons, probably.
Yeah, because let me tell you, this is like, that's how I described it actually to Yannick the last night, is it's like one of the most ahead of its time films ever, but yet simultaneously one of the most like cancelable un-PC films at the same time. And it really depends on like what you're looking at exactly with it. But it's basically Dirk Bogarde plays like a professor at Oxford. And there's a student who's like this gorgeous European girl. She's played by a French actress, but for some reason she's supposed to be Austrian. It's weird. The accents don't make sense, but and he's like, of course he like is like, oh, she's beautiful in his mind. He doesn't say these things, but you can tell by the way he's like leering at her. Oh, that's what I was going to say. This movie that I'm describing, Accident, and then the other movie that I'm going to tell you about, I kind of almost call them like this yin and yang pairing. They're like an ode to the quote male gaze because so much is communicated through that, and the movies are really about that in different ways. So Accident is like so much is just communicated by the way we just see Dirk Bogarde look at this girl all the time. And he has a student who's played by a young Michael York. Now, if you the name's not familiar, Michael York is Basil in Austin Powers. You know, the fucking boss, like, Austin, no. You know what I'm talking about? The blonde-haired guy.
Oh, yeah.
And Austin Powers beats up his mother in the one scene. He's like, that's my mother, Austin. Yeah, so a young version of him. And he's like a very good-looking guy as a young guy. I guess he still is. I was older. But that's his, like, student. And he's like, this guy is like another rich guy. He's very much in the mold of Tony, but he's a much, like, less, like, prominent character. Right? Okay. So he's like, oh yes, like my father, Lord, blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to marry this girl. Like, so in other words, the rich Austrian girl is who he's going to marry, but he's like, he barely even knows her at this point. And so he doesn't know his professor leers at her. So he's like, oh, you'll introduce us. Yes.
Yeah. This is totally, you're going to hook us up.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, there's another professor at Oxford who's kind of like his frenemy, who's like, cause he's like, I say frenemy because he's like jealous because this guy gets on radio and stuff and is like the public intellectual everyone goes to. And there's all these rumors like, oh, like ladies love him or some shit. Or he's always talking about sex on the radio. Like, he's like a provocative professor guy. And So, but he's just like, whatever, he's a loser. I'm much more handsome than him. And his wife is like stupid or whatever. And he hates his life. He's like, so this movie is about like being kind of a petty, cowardly, jealous man. It's really is like I would say like a very sort of toxic masculinity based film. It's
wow.
Why I say it's very ahead of its time, because it's really putting that stuff out there. But like I'll get to the way it's depicted on screen makes you wonder, like, you know, if at the time this was doing almost like it's hard to know. That it's complicated, but it's a worthwhile film for that reason. So it's like you have this guy, and so the professor, he finds out later after this whole like long sequence of like everyone, all the characters coming to his house for like a day of like drinking, and it goes very weird because everyone's getting way too drunk, but like you get the impression he's trying to get all the other people drunk on purpose so eventually he can sneak off with this girl, right?
Ooh.
Yeah. But it's not quite working out because everyone's kind of like a little bit more either onto him than he thinks, / like has their own weird agenda. So the Michael York,
no one wants to leave him alone with the girl he's trying to get along with.
Yeah, right. It's like that classic.
Does she
thing.
like him? What's her response?
It doesn't.
To all of this?
He like, again, the movie's so stuck to his point of view, engaged very intentionally. That's, you never think she likes him, but you do see what he sees in the sense that like, oh, she's giving me a flirty eye. That's enough. But that's what I mean. Is like,
that's all I need is just a look. And
we know now whether they knew then. And my point is, I think the movie kind of did know then, even if it wasn't ready to like sound the alarm necessarily. This like movie's very subtle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of like, yeah, this is fucked up. Like I also said, another way I put it to Yannick was like,
a look is not alike.
Yeah, it's like a Woody Allen movie, except instead of trying to be funny or act like this shit is cute, it's like straight up showing it for what it really is, like really depraved,
kind of creepy,
and just the lowest of the low. Like this movie is like wallows in its shame, like very intentionally.
Professors preying on students.
Yeah, like but like it's like the Dirk Bogarde character, like especially by the time you get to the end of the movie, there's no doubt that you think this guy is just like a loathsome, like cowardly loser. Mm-hmm. So, but like he is your main character and you are in his point of view for a lot of it. So he's like, oh, I should say the reason this movie's called Accident is because it opens up with like this car. I don't want to say too much in case you watch it, but like it opens up with this car accident that involves two of the characters, and then it flashes back to explain basically everything leading up to that.
Oh, how they got there. Cool.
Yeah. So like, he's like, let's see how they're this girl, and it doesn't go well. And then later he finds out that his rival professor, his frenemy professor, has been sleeping with the girl already. And he literally, I don't want to spoil it, he literally catches them, and it's like incredibly weird scene because you're like,
but isn't he married?
Yes.
The frenemy professor has the both
of them are married. Frenemy professor's married, and our main professor's married, and his wife is pregnant. So he's like, he wants to cheat on his pregnant wife, and the other guy is already cheating on his wife. It's like really embarrassing because it's like basically this whole movie's framing is like these men lust after this younger woman and like completely shun and just like they're older women. They're not even casual about it. Like they'll talk about it like whatever. She's what, like they're so desperate and embarrassing. And like they're just using their power to try to coerce this out of the girl, you know, and like again, very subtle ways, which is how it is in real life. Like that's what I mean about this movie being so ahead of its time. It's not like, oh, I'm gonna be all like whatever and like outwardly sexually harass you. It's more like very calm, very nice, but subtly just like literally cornering you in a room. You know what I mean? So again, they really did a great job with this film, and it kind of touches on other things like the roles that alcoholism plays in these things, just like the class relationships which become important, and obviously the servant. And the film's climax, this is where it really gets to the line of like, okay, like this is very ahead of its time, but also like maybe, I don't know. It's hard to know what to make of it. You just know that it's one of the most uncomfortable scenes ever, especially in a modern perspective. But I imagine it was even then too, because everyone knew these things were wrong, even if they didn't want to admit it. It like basically ends with the guy, like, I don't want to say too much, but it's impossible to say too little. Like more or less like date raping the girl.
Who
And,
does?
like,
The professor?
Yeah,
Bogart?
yeah. And it's like, and it's not like his life goes well for him after that. It's basically like, you know, I by doing this, I killed any real thing we could have had, and it's already dead anyways. And a million other things went wrong, including this car accident where one of the characters dies. And it's like, I won't say who, just so in case you don't want it spoiled. And it's like, all these things have happened, but there's no one's going to get punished. No one's going to have anything go wrong for them. Life's just going to go on. It has one of the most just like shrug endings ever. And so it's really interesting how it kind of does all that.
But I think that says a lot. I think that's a statement in itself.
Yeah.
If you're in a position to exert your power over someone, and even if people get hurt, there's no repercussions. Nothing's going to happen. It's fine. You are who you are. That means you can get away with it.
Right. So
you can get away with it.
It's again, in that sense, even though there's a lot in common with The Servant, which I'm about to talk about, is also a lot that's a little subtly different. So it was surprising to me just for that. But yeah, so like I said, like this film was the follow-up to The Servant. This one came out in 1967. Servant came out in 1963. There are two other movies that Losey and Pinter are tied to, and also Bogarde. So there's it's called you'll like this one. It's called Modesty Blase, I think is how it's pronounced. And it's
a fun name already.
Yeah, it's a film from 1966 where technically Pinter's not the credited screenwriter, but like everyone knows he basically did all the rewrites. And Bogarde's in it in a supporting role, but like the main thing is that it's what they called a spy-fi. I don't know if that means it.
Oh my gosh, a sci-fi movie?
Yeah,
from the 70s? I'm so in.
Yes, yeah. I recommend you look this up, and like, maybe I'll watch it too, but it sounds like it's so up your alley.
It's up my alley.
I don't know too much else about it, but I'm sure it is. Another one they made was called the Go-Between in 1971, but Bogarde's not in that one, so it's kind of not really relevant for us, and I didn't watch it. But yeah, so now a little bit about Joseph Losey, because this is important to maybe keep in mind when we talk about The Servant. Yeah, and I didn't know any of this because I never really looked him up before, but it was just fascinating because he directed one of my favorite movies. But this is really interesting, like history here. So he's an American. I kind of like just assumed he was British, like everyone else involved with the movie. No, he's an American who was exiled to England because he was blacklisted in Hollywood. You know about the Hollywood blacklist and all that, right?
Yeah, but was it because they found out?
Well, so I'll tell these stories but basically it's like, anybody that was like even suspected, quote, of being a communist could be called up to the House of Un-American Activities Committee and shit, and McCarthy and all that, and just basically be like, well, we'll try to, but a lot of the time it just meant, oh, you're barred from making scripts by this studio, because different studios and producers had positions on these things, showing their support for it. And it was just a nightmare. It's something that period's over now, but really, Hollywood's never been the same since. And some people, like usually sons and daughters of people that were blacklisted, are still pretty bitter about it. Like there was an episode of Seinfeld where this came up, where there was one writer who's like, he named names, because this whole thing, like he was like someone like betrayed the other writers, because often it was fixated on screenwriters, like they were the communists. So this Losey was a director. So this is interesting. So he was working at RKO, and RKO was bought by Howard Hughes. If you've seen The Aviator, none of this will be surprising.
I have.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You remember there's stuff like not literally depicting this, but there's stuff related to this. So this shouldn't be surprising to you. So Howard Hughes was like all paranoid about communists and all this stuff. So he was doing crazy things. And so Losey was working at Howard Hughes, and he was pretty proudly like on the left, and so it's not like even the accusations against him were necessarily false. They just were like, that's not how free speech and stuff are supposed to work, right? So anyway, he's working at RKO, and he's like tells the story that like Howard Hughes had this movie. The title of this was later changed, but the title of the film was called "I Married a Communist," and this is like this. The film was later renamed "The Woman of Pier 13," and then that name, the original name, "I Married a Communist," was later
used for a Philip Roth novel of that name, but it has not, as far as I know, it doesn't really have anything directly to do with this movie.
Okay.
But the movie was Howard Hughes' way of being like, he would offer to directors, like, I want you to direct this film, how I married a communist. And if you said, oh, I don't want to do that, he'd be like, that's proof you're a communist because you don't want So that's basically what happened. He's like, Losey denied, it's like, I turned down the offer. And he's like, I knew it. You are a communist. And so he was fucking brought to the fucking McCarthyite.
You're kidding.
Yeah. That's how
Because Howard Hughes, because he didn't want to direct a communist movie.
Yeah, basically.
What?
Yeah. So, and it's interesting. I haven't seen this film, but this is another little tidbit I found that I did not know. Martin Scorsese played a character based on Losey in this film called Guilty by Suspicion, which is about kind of the blacklist stuff. So that's interesting. So that's pretty cool.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Why did I not realize that
Martin?
Marty Scorsese had done acting?
Yeah, well, he has it. I mean, he's acted his own movies, and here and there people have asked him to
his
be in
own
other
stuff,
things.
but yeah.
Well, he's also in the Kurosawa film Dreams. It was weird. He did a few more times, like around the late 80s, early 90s. He people were just like, can you please be in this movie? And he'd be like, all right, whatever. Great guy. Yeah. So, and we already talked about Pinter and kind of that whole thing, but the combination of the two, once they started working together, is like, they just were totally trying to push the mediums of what they were doing. And this is how we get to The Servant. Like they wanted the subtext, every single, and this is true of Accident. It's like every little detail is so purposeful. So and that's why you when you rewatch these movies, you'll never run out of stuff because every little thing is there on purpose pretty much. The way we used to talk about it in film school is the mise en scène, which is just that's actually just what French called directing, period. But it's basically everything in the shot. So everything in the shot is intentional. And this is mirrored in the script because every single word and word that's not there is incredibly intentional and deliberate and using the space in a very particular way. And just mood and atmosphere are kind of king. Now I mentioned there's the other film I watched, which is kind of the yang to that yin of The Accident. And I won't go too much into this because this is another one maybe you should just watch and have fun with. But this kind of is the origin of Dirk Bogarde playing con artists as his thing. It's this movie called Cast a Dark Shadow. And this has only been recently restored for a Criterion. And it's really cool. It's a beautiful looking film. And it's very similar to the Servant, the way he plays his character. He's basically this suave guy who's married to a rich old lady. And he wants to make sure he gets in her will, but he misunderstands something about what her lawyer's trying to do with her will. And he murders her thinking he secured his fortune, only to find out he had it it was almost like my mistake. He had it exactly wrong. And she was trying to modify her will to include him, and he killed her before she could do it. So,
oh my God.
So he fucked up. So now he's how do I got to do it again, basically. So he meets another woman. He's I'm going to manipulate her. And she's a little bit younger because the wife at the start is super old. She's little old, almost like Queen of England lady. She's
and who plays the younger guy?
Dirk Bogarde. Dirk Bogarde, so our servant. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Oh
so
my
this
God,
is
I'm already in. I'm in.
Yeah,
this
you're gonna love
awesome.
it. And he does similar things. He's giving her drinks. That's how he keeps her very in his control. It's
giving her foot baths.
Yes, all that stuff. He's very whatever. But why I said this is the yang to that Accident's yin is because this film is very ahead of its time, and then it's very feminist because what happens is the woman he meets that he's oh, she'll be my next mark. I'll get her to marry me and then I'll take her money. She's this very quippy, fast talking, aggressive lady who immediately catches on to his shit.
She's too sharp for him.
But
too sharp for you.
Yeah, too sharp for you. But it's weird because she doesn't oh, I'm going to get rid of you. She's basically that's fine, but I just don't think you're going to get anything by on me. She has this very Katharine Hepburn kind of vibe to her.
You can try.
She's she talks. So she talks like one of these like His Girl Friday, like like very just like fast talking screwball characters. But the film is still a dark psychological thriller that's focused on Dirk Bogarde's character, and like he's like basically a little like loopy in the head, and there's definitely stuff there too, like where he's like looking at like muscle magazines and stuff where it's like, oh, this guy, he's probably gay, and he's just like, this is just his grift, which again, I think from what we know about these types of grifters in real life is like a pretty common thing, because it's like it's easier for them if they know that they're not actually ever really attracted to these women, you know?
Oh, yeah,
Right?
that makes sense.
It's easier. So yeah, there's a lot of cool twists in this movie, because like what I just said is like, yeah, I guess I gave you the first twist, but it's like it really just keeps going from there with twist after twist, and like it has a genius kind of ending. Like I liked Accident a lot, but it's not on the level of The Servant. This film also not on the level of The Servant, but is like a truly like another like really great film that's like the kind of masterpiece level. And like I said, it's like it's kind of like really pushed the boundary of being like, guess what? Like some ladies aren't to be fucked with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. But yeah, so now let's kind of get into The Servant here. And before we get into the plot, I just want to again shout out to some of the people involved in this. James Fox, who plays Tony, he's still acting to this day. Like he just is like the go-to guy to play like old British dudes. Like not even old, like just like, oh, like a good looking, like older guy. So he's just like in so many movies and like small supporting roles still.
Good
like,
for
yeah,
him.
look up his IMDb. You'll be like, oh, he's in that. He's in that. But The Servant was like his first real movie. So when he got his BAFTA nomination and he won, it was for Best Newcomer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And his performance is just, we're going to talk about it, is incredible. Also nominated, but because it was non-gendered and they actually had to compete against each other, was Wendy Craig, who played Susan, his fiance. And she,
really?
Yeah, I believe she's still, I mean, she's just mostly known for like, she didn't really have much of a movie career beyond this. She's mostly known for being on like British sitcoms and stuff, but she had a good career. Now we got to get to my girl, Sarah Miles, who plays Vera. Yes, she kind of like, this role really like blew her up for a time, like because she's not in much movies after the 60s and early 70s, but like she was like a big deal in a weird way for a little while, especially in England, because she did this film, kind of blew her up. She got a BAFTA nomination and stuff. I believe won. Yeah, I think. Oh no, she was just nom. She didn't win. But she then went on to be in Blow Up, which is I don't know if you've seen that, but that's a film we're definitely going to watch and talk about at some point.
I've not seen it. No.
It's like, if you want to know where that like swinging London 60s stuff in Austin Powers is basically coming from, it's directly ripped from this movie.
Okay.
Yeah. And like the photography, like, no, yes, that's directly ripped from that movie.
Oh my God.
Which when I first saw it was like a revelation. But yeah, Sarah Miles is in it, and it's a kind of similar thing because, you know, kind of what she was known for. It's just like, had like a very specific way of just like playing this like, oh, like perfect object of male gaze kind of character.
I mean, she's gorgeous. She's
not gorgeous. She's got these giant eyes that are just like, what's going on?
Big blue with the dark hair. Like she literally looks like she looks like old school Linda Carter.
Yes.
Like she looks like a version of Wonder Woman. She's stunning.
Oh, I would have loved her Wonder Woman.
She would have probably done really well, actually.
Yeah,
she's a really strong female. I think she would have done well.
Yeah, part of what makes her
Linda Carter's Linda Carter, but yeah.
Well, yeah, there's no getting.
There's no real. But if she needed an understudy for any reason, you're not feeling well.
We skipped over Wonder Woman 84, and let's keep it that way. But
I'm okay
you're just already bringing back memories, bad memories.
I'm okay skipping it.
But you know, with Sarah Miles, I mean, like to me, one thing that is very relevant to The Servant, like kind of like what's notable about her, is part of her charm too, I think, is like in The Servants, like this is something her character is actually doing on purpose, but it's like, to me, kind of part of her whole on-screen persona is she's like very kind of like like that, like, oh, like careless, but like very like soft, like, oh no, don't. It's like kind of her whole thing, and then she has her
like a delicate. She's like a A delicate free spirit.
Exactly. And she has this accent. She's from Essex. So like her accent's very different than other people's accents in the movie. Like later Barrett, we kind of get more of a sense of his quote real accent. And it's a bit more like hers, but it's like, because when he's doing the serving, he's putting on an affectation to be more palatable to the Londoner, the upper class Londoners. But her accent immediately sticks out, and it's like, again, part of her charm with her whole like mannerisms. And she's like, "Oh no, sir, no." and again, the way the movie makes that, which on its code should not be considered like something sexual, the way it very much tries to paint it that way in a way that
and very much would be accepted today if someone was doing. Yeah.
Which, that's to my point about Blow Up, and you'll understand when you see that movie. It's like, I imagine that her casting in Blow Up was like very much like, oh, we're like playing to this already pre-existing kind of like obsession that was triggered by what was being done in The Servant.
Sure.
Yeah. So like I said, Bogarde won the BAFTA for Best Actor, but the film also won for cinematography, and it was nominated in pretty much every other category.
I mean, I get the cinematography. I mean, I was very pleasantly pleased, I guess I should say. I was really into the cinematography for this movie. I thought it was really well shot. I liked, like I said, a lot of those mirror shots. I was like, this is cool. This is cool. And then a lot of the shadows gave me Hitchcock vibes. I just really dug the way it looked.
Yeah, I honestly, I wish I could like say more about the cinematography other than just it's great. I mean, there's a lot, I guess, but I'm like, you've seen it, and anyone who sees it is going to know it's just like this pristine thing. So one thing I want to shout out too is, I don't know if you caught this. This is something, so now this is like the first thing, like of many things I'm probably going to say that based on what you said, you might not have caught, but are fascinating. So the song, it's an original song for the movie called All Gone. You hear it four times throughout the movie.
Bunch?
Yes,
yeah, that's like the sexy trope, the sexy music.
So I can't live without you. Yeah. So there's three. I say you hear it four times. You hear one version of it two times, but there's three different versions of the song, like three different sort of variations.
I think I literally just mushed it together in my head and just heard the same one.
I didn't notice this till literally this time of watching it.
Oh, okay.
And that's because like I had researched pointed out to me, but now I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. I can tell. And again, just another level of like, holy shit, the specificity and intention in this movie is off the charts. So the three versions, this is my interpretation, but I think it's indisputable. The three versions represent Tony's three relationships. So the first version you hear is the Susan version. And the Susan version, and like they're all related to sex. They're all songs of lust, mind you. Like, right. But like there's three different variations of lust and the object of lust, right? So the first version is the Susan version. You only hear it once, and it's that scene where you talked about, they're clothed making out and Barrett interrupts them, right? The second version, which you hear twice, is the Vera version. The Vera version, the first time you hear it, it's very notable, and we'll talk more about what I mean, but this is the oh man, it's hard to talk about this stuff without getting vulgar, but so fair warning on that. But this is the I'll try to be as anatomical about it, but this is the cunnilingus song, basically.
What?
Yeah, and this is like, and also the liquid cocaine song. I'll explain more what I mean by both of that when we get to it. But so that's the Vera version. You hear it a second time when after that the big revelation scene where it's like, oh, Vera's not my sister, and we know the asterisk I'm putting there. It's like the whole comes crashing down, and Tony goes into timeout for himself. He puts back on the record, and it's that he's just replaying in his head, trying to like get back to that place, but it's all imploded. And then the last version, which you hear in the climax of the movie, the scene you alluded to, the sort of orgy thing, is the Barrett version, because ultimately Tony's only got one lover, or one master, one everything, and it's Barrett. And his version is very dark and twisted. Barrett. And like I also point out and you'll explain I'll explain what I mean momentarily, but this is the take the heroin and drink the blood version of the song. That's the lust, that variation of lust is, it's like, yeah, because I guess I should say, like,
sure.
The variation of lust also has to do with the sort of substance and stage, where the first version I should have said is like just just a nice cup of brandy version. But now we're just turning it into like this creature of the night, like
we're in it. They're
strung out vampire thing. So,
deep in it.
So one of the first things, and I want to make sure you jump in with your thoughts on any of these things.
Okay.
If you notice them or not or whatever. One of the first things we see, because I think that everything's kind of communicated from the opening scene. Tony's doing what? He's laying in the chair, like napping, drunk napping, essentially. It's like somewhere between passed out
because he drank
napping.
beers.
Yeah.
He's late, and he's like, oh, it's already 3:00.
Yeah. So to me, what this establishes, amongst many other things, this is an important way of framing it in our modern context. What Tony is, we said Manchild earlier. What Tony is and what he wants and how he's able to be manipulated by Barrett is because Barrett knows this right away. Tony is a frat boy.
Immediately, he's kind of a mess. He has an appointment. Yeah.
He's a fucking frat boy. He wants to go back to the frat house.
A frat boy.
That's all he wants.
He needs to be taken care of.
Right. Well, it's like, he wants to be taken care of, but it's like the thing where you have like a younger pledge or something. He like wants that. He wants to like, you have to like do what I say and look up to me, but really we're bros, and like you also should be just like chilling with me and like my life.
Do whatever you want.
No women in this house.
This boring girl.
Yeah. No women.
Yeah.
No women. Like unless they're for sex. Like it's basically, and then when they're done with the sex, they leave because in this house. That's the fantasy he has. And his version, to put it back in the period context, would have been a version that was tied to going to boarding school and then being in the military. And then now this is his first time as an adult not being in a boarding school and not being in the military, which is why, again, he's so vulnerable to this. He hasn't figured out how to live like a normal adult yet. And because of his class privilege, he's able to be like, well, I'll just hire a servant. And right away, he's like, so there's a couple little things. Just this articulates everything I'm saying about the expertise of the direction and the writing, right? So he like the first thing he does after he wakes up now, he immediately like just starts putting on his airs. He's like, oh, I was just in the jungle, which immediately like communicates.
Oh yeah, I got to go to all these.
I travel around the world, and I'm part of the British Empire, and like I do what I want, like, and so like he's this big.
It's definitely like a version of peacocking, like just fluffing your feathers and be like, look at me.
Yeah, peacocking is the right word. Well, it's like. It's also like, and this ties into what he tells him in a moment, but like, he's like, I'm this entrepreneur. Like, I'm so amazing. Like, you have no idea. And then he's like, they go into this living room, and he's like, oh, he sits down. Tony sits down and goes, please sit down. Like, he's doing it like he's being gracious. Like, oh, please sit down, servant. You're allowed to sit. As soon as Barrett sits, Tony immediately stands back up. And then starts pacing around him.
I saw that.
So in other words, he just did it so Barrett would sit, and then immediately he's like, no, I need to be standing above you. See, like I
have the upper hand. But if I'm not mistaken,
no,
I think he tells him to sit down 3 times.
No,
he tells
very
Barrett
intentional.
to sit, and he doesn't, and then he says, "Go on, sit," and then he says, "Sit down," and then the third time he says it, if I'm thinking about the right scene. Then Barrett finally sits, and you're right. Then he stands. So he told him a bunch of times to sit, and Barrett didn't want to initially.
No, exactly, exactly. Well, so you hit the nail on the head, because when I get into Barrett, every single thing Barrett does is incredibly intentional, and he knows his end game the whole time, which is why it's so amazing to watch this movie where you have no idea where it's going, and the character knows where it's going the whole time. But and so everything he does, even things that seem accidental or things that seem like they're following a different plan than the final plan, it's like, no, it's all for the final plan. So he's very deliberate. Tony, on the other hand, and I nickname him Dumb Tony, because part of the point, and this is something I didn't pick up on the first time I watched it, but like every time now since, especially the last time, Tony's really, really dumb. And the movie wants you to know that Tony's really dumb. He's really dumb. It's not even just anything else. He is like give him all the caveats. He's especially dumb even given those caveats. Like, so, and this is just like kind of what makes him almost like empathetic. He just doesn't know better. So when he does the thing with the sitting and standing, it is intentional and on purpose, but he's not really thinking about it. It's almost like this very sudden urge that's like pre-programmed where he's like, I need him to sit, so I'm going to sit. And he's like, wait, I need to stand, so I'm going to stand. It's like he doesn't realize what he's doing until after he's done it, is what I'm saying.
I think that Tony's immaturity is one of the main things that allows him to believe he has this in and that he can control him. Yeah, he needs to tell me, a servant, about his travels. He needs to brag to me about where he's been, and I'm just the help. Why does he need me to think all these things about him?
Right. It's textbook behavior.
How insecure is he? How desperate is he? Yeah, where you have to toot your own horn all the time because you don't feel anyone else will toot it for you. At the same time, I think that was Barrett's like, oh, I see. You're super insecure. You can't take care of yourself, and you've got a lot of money, and you're kind of dumb.
You're kind of dumb.
Obviously, you're an easy mark.
Right.
Obviously, you're an easy mark. Yeah, you're kind of dumb because why would he need to be educated when he has money, no real job? And even Barrett says you would benefit from a job later on. You would when he's more comfortable and he feels that he can talk to Barrett, or that he feels like Barrett can talk to Tony like that. He said, you would benefit from an occupation of some kind.
Yeah, which to clarify, that's just
and
Barrett
he's like, maybe I should.
Okay, so I think that's one of Barrett's first real assertions of like power moves is telling him something like, you could get a job,
right?
You could benefit from a job. Here I am cleaning up all of your mess without a maid. It's a lot of work. You should do something. Get up off your ass and get a job.
Well,
that's one of the first times I'm like, oh, Barrett's like bringing it.
No. So I gotta point this out. So he doesn't. I'm pretty sure I know the line you're talking about. He doesn't say that until what I call phase 3. And
phase 3.
And in phase 3, I mean, this would have been true in phase 1 as well. But in by phase 3, it's like he's in no way, shape, or form trying to say this, actually trying to encourage Tony to do anything other than just making him feel bad about himself. That's the only thing he's trying to do there. So he doesn't want Tony to have a job or anything. But yes, you're right. And he wouldn't have had, the reason it's definitely in phase 3 too is like phase 1 required him to play a very different note of like being very true to the form of a servant, almost to a fault, but like true to that, where he wouldn't say anything a servant wouldn't say, which it would include like telling him about what his occupational duty,
or telling him anything. Yeah, I think that third phase, he really starts to assert himself as having some kind of power over Tony, even if it's just this like emotional power that he's developed. And then when Barrett says when Tony says to Barrett, I don't know where I'd be without you. That kind of thing.
Yes.
I'm like, oh, he's hooked.
Well, so let me jump into this because we even mentioned the stuff about like his work and stuff, and like this all still plays into just like stuff he like communicates to Barrett right from that opening scene. So he's like, one of the things he says, he's like, after he stands out, first he explains, I want a man servant. Big emphasis on man. And he follows up and be like, don't want the thought of some housekeeper, some bloody woman. Like, he's like, in his mind, he's like,
oh, telling me, you're right. He's
telling me what to do. And
telling me what to do. And what happens? Barrett tells him what to do at the end.
But it's such a frat boy mentality because basically what he's saying is, I'm too much of a big boy for a mommy. So I don't want a mommy, and I definitely don't want a naggy wife. That's why I'm not married yet. It's this dual track thing. So the only thing left is like, I just need, like I said, I need a bro who does all the things I'm quote mom would do. But like, I can feel comfortable in my insecure self because I'm like, he's not some lady telling me what to do. He's a loyal like brother or something. Like,
here's my other thing is that his fiance. So part of me was like, oh, is this the time period where manservants are the norm? Where if you're rich, you have a manservant.
It's kind of the time period where I'll answer that. It's kind of, I would say, and again, I am not really the authority to say, but from what I gather, it's kind of a time period when it's no longer a norm, but it's like still a thing. And so that's why she's like, you have a manservant? Like,
yes, really? That's exactly what I was getting at. His fiance is like a manservant. Like, that seems like a thing that maybe you would have, but like, it's not cool. It's not in fashion anymore to have a manservant.
That's the exact way to put it. It's not in fashion.
So she's like, oh, you're getting a manservant. Like, okay, that's kind of weird, but I guess people do that. So I kind of assumed by her response that it wasn't normal anymore, but that some people might still do that.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
He might be one of those some people, you know, because her reaction was, you know, like, oh, but like she also didn't seem to react much about having a maid, about Vera. And Vera kind of stays out of her sight for a little bit in the beginning as well. Right. But then Vera goes to her in the end. And that's kind of like a blackmail move, you know?
Well,
where she's
I want to get to how that ended, because that's like honestly the most fascinating and like epitome of the movie. But
it's so crazy.
Again, I just want to get I'm sticking on it because like it's just amazing to point out how much there is there. So like the last thing that really kind of in this opening scene that I wanted to point out there, after we get the whole thing with like the maid stuff, is his talk about like his like kind of like insecure one-upsmanship when he's asking Barrett like, oh, and this also sets up the plot line about what his quote job situation is like he like when Barrett's like, oh, who have you worked for? He's like, he mentions Lord Barr. He's like, oh, Lord Barr, my father knew him well. It's like this thing of like, I know everyone you know. You don't know anyone I don't know. And it's like, that it also he goes, do you like Indian? Do you make Indian dishes? I've been to it. Like, it's like his way of being like, I've been to India. I know a lot about them. It's like, it's again, that
I know a lot. You better figure it out.
Yeah. It enforces a couple of things. It enforces the imperial class stuff, but it also just enforces straight up like this thing where he's like, I'm so worldly and you need to impress me. And then to take that last point to the conclusion, this is where it gets into the whole job thing and also why we know, and this is why this subplot's in the movie at all. It's just really to clarify the dumb-dumbness of Dumb Tony. Is he starts talking about his thing in Brazil, and so like listen to some of the stuff he says. He goes like, "Oh, I'm going to build cities plural." He later says three. I'm going to build three cities in Brazil. And he goes in the jungle. Later, he changes it to, in the plains, but we'll have to clear some jungle. And he says, and later in the scene, like the subsequent scene when we first meet Susan, they go to dinner and she's like asking him questions. And you can tell that's the thing. Once you get this, you realize how much Susan knows Tony's dumb as shit. And it thinks he's one of the dumbest people ever, which again is really important to understanding her relationship to Barrett. So she's like, Tony's like, yeah, well, we're going to build 3 cities in the jungle. And she's like, where are you going to get these people to populate these cities? Because you keep saying cities, let alone 3. And he's like, well, we'll get them from Asia Minor. And it's like, there's a lot of stuff going on over there that like, and it's like, okay, Asia Minor.
We're going to help them. We're going to help them make a new life for themselves.
He's talking about moving people from one side of the world to another side of the world for no reason other than like,
he wants to build a city.
Yeah, basically what I'm getting at is literally nothing he says makes even the slightest amount of sense. It's like this guy is dumb. And the reason I don't even think this is 100% him coming up with these ideas. That could be one reason why they're so dumb. What I assume is, and this is something I know people like this in real life. That's why it's so noticeable that this guy's a textbook mark for any con artist. So I think what you're getting here in this subplot is he's already been the mark of a con artist. Some guy sold him this idea of going to Brazil and building cities, and it's so stupid. No one would believe it.
Oh my God, that's such a good insight. Yes. Well, that would make sense.
And like the only reason it's not made up more of is because, and this is the thing, he's telling this to Susan. So I think Susan immediately is like, Whoever did this to him already took their money and ran, and he's still fine. So I'll just let him go on thinking what he says makes sense. And I'm not going to hurt his feelings. So Susan, this is our entry point to talk about Susan, because it's really important to understand the character. Susan, because you mentioned her before about like the way she treats Barrett, and I think some of what you said is right, but like the stuff that you were missing there, I think you need to like understand the part I just said. Susan is one of those ladies who's like, I love this guy. He's wealthy enough that it almost doesn't matter what he does, but I know he's dumb. I know he's dumb as a box of rocks, and he needs help. Like he can't do anything for himself. He's too dumb.
Right.
So in other words, part of my role in being in this relationship with him is to give him guidance, to tell him what to do, and to like decide what he needs to know and when, like including the fact that I guess he doesn't need to know that he's been conned. Then she goes to the apartment, and what happens? She finds out that Tony hired this manservant without consulting her.
Without telling her.
And it's like he's living in the house, meaning he's going to be around in 24/7, taking care of all his needs.
Like, can't he just leave at a time and like go home?
Right. So it's not that, I mean, I think later it is, but it's not that she thinks he's like some real threat or that he's like a con artist himself or that anything like that. I think it's as simple as that. What she immediately doesn't like about Barrett, and like it makes her very hostile towards him, is she's just like, this guy is making me very jealous, but not jealous in a petty way, jealous in like a, like, I don't know what I'm going to do. This is a serious problem way, because like I said, my entire role in Tony's life is to give him guidance and to like dictate him because he needs guidance. He can't do it on his own. And here's someone else, and he's picking out the furniture in the house, which it's like tells me is like he's calling the shots really around here, because I know Tony's too dumb to decide things on his own. He only knows how to order a drink. And it's like literally, it's funny. It's how it reverses those stereotypes. Like, but Tony's the dumb blonde male who only knows how to order a drink. And so she's like, this is a problem. Like, it doesn't have to go nearly as far as it goes. I just know it's a problem because I want to marry Tony, and my job will be to be the person who picks the furniture in his house,
to take care of
someone else, and take care of him, and someone else is taking care of him.
Barrett just decorated the whole house.
Yeah, so she just immediately
Barrett made changes to the house. That's definitely stepping on her toes.
So in other words, she's like I said, she's a much more strong-willed and like straightforward character than Tony is, but she also is a victim of her insecurities. And so those are her insecurities that are being provoked by Barrett. So it makes her hostile and jealous, and this is where I get to the point about how everything is just going according to Barrett's plan. Barrett knows this immediately and immediately starts deliberately trying to trigger her.
Moving the flowers.
Yeah, all that stuff. He's playing the role. He's basically giving her what he knows her fear is so that she will continue to push against him to Tony, which Barrett knows won't make Tony less trusting of him. It'll just make Tony less trusting of Susan. So he's an expert. He's a fucking expert at doing what he's doing. He's just like, oh, right. And so that's why it's important. And again, in phase one, this is how he does what he does to Susan. He never breaks character with her. He always is, I'm just a servant. But he knows subtly just by doing that a certain way, he can trigger the shit out of her. And that's like that scene late where they're like in the bedroom and moving the flowers. That's such a perfectly acted scene on his part where he's just like, oh, just moving here. I don't want to say what I think of that. That's all. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. And she has no idea. Like she thinks like, you little bitch, I'm going to have you out of here.
I can't wait to have a reason to get you fired.
Right. And so she just she like knows that he's like still kind of has some upper hand, but like she has no idea what he's really up to. But yeah, so I also want to just point out, we kind of already talked about it, but like just pretty much throughout the movie, you can just pay attention to the mirrors. Like I said, you can count them in every room. I don't have too much to say about like what they mean, except to say that like, because I think it's open to interpretation and they're all fine. It's just this idea of like, there's multiple selves. There's like a shadow self. It's kind of like, like Jungian psychology shit. It's like there's like a shadow self and shadows, and this is plays in the cinematography is like a very important thing. And what kind of happens is this film kind of comes from this very sort of grounded light world realism into this very shadowy, surrealistic nightmare. And so we kind of flip from one side of the mirror to the other. Yeah. And I think you even kind of see that in some of the imagery. So we already covered the whole thing. And one of the things that comes up in this little Cold War between Barrett and Susan is just, and this is important because it tracks something later, I'll get into in a second, is taste, right? And again, this movie's so smart because it's using this as like a character thing and like something between these characters, but really it's also just code to communicate to the audience. Pay attention to the decor. Pay attention to the way the decor changes, the layout of this house. This house is so amazing. I love anything that's like the production design is like this house and you're in this space and it's so intricate and it's got this. But like I said, this subtle set deck. So I mentioned the three phases. The three phases are reflected in the stage, the set deck. So the first stage is the luring Tony in stage, right? And you'll notice what Barrett's putting up that Susan, again, doesn't like, but she doesn't necessarily dislike it because of the actual taste involved. She just dislikes it because it's Barrett asserting his taste, right? But it's not Barrett's real taste, as we'll find out. This is just like for the purposes of luring Tony in. So it's stuff that he thinks Tony will like, but Tony knows like nothing about really. So it's like Barrett, like, see, you need me. And like the stuff is, it's very like imperial. Like you'll see one thing that stays up through all three phases, even though it doesn't fit in phase 2 and 3. It's just like, and whereas everything is almost designed around in phase 1 is like, it's Tony in his military uniform. There's like a portrait of him in his military uniform. And then you see other like actual paintings of like revolutionary kind of like not like the literal revolutionary war, but like French Revolution and other wars in that period, like generals and their like stockings, like standing up in front of the soldiers. Yeah. It's like all this stuff. And there's also the light homoerotic touches, which come very important later, but you'll notice like little sculptures of muscle guys and guys like kneeling on their like fists and stuff. And so the second phase, there's not too much to say about it, but the second phase is the breaking Tony down phase. And so the set deck there is just like literally just chaos and decrepit and unkept. And that's just when Tony kind of taking care of himself. And when Barrett first comes back and he's just kind of letting it get worse and worse so that Tony again is like more desperate for like him to fix it for him. And it's like just this symbolized, as we see with Tony, this vacant, lifeless, crumbling kind of thing. And then we get to the third phase, and the third phase is really kind of like a gradual transition that in terms of the third phase of the plot or the grift, you see kind of go on gradually, but just describing kind of where it ends up in the set deck is what I call Barrett's true castle, because it's also the reveal of his true characters in the set design of this castle. It's dark, gothic, just like overtly sexual, kind of got this noir thing where it's emphasis on the shadows, very homoerotic where it wants to be, and just in general kind of suave, like yes, like he's like he wears a smoking jacket when he's finally in his final stage. It's like I'm like the Playboy guy. It's like it's amazing. It's just incredible. It's like it's so cool. So I fell in love with the movie the first time I saw it, almost just looking at this. I was like, this is so cool that they took it here. One thing I'll just say is so there's that restaurant scene. I still don't know how to like really pick up on like what's going on there, like why it's there, other than to say maybe just Pinter just wanted to have characters talking because he is such a playwright and he gave himself a cameo. I sure there's a lot more to it. I just still after all these years can't crack it. So I'll just put that out there. And we already kind of talked about this too, but there's a specific scene I want to point out too. Because we're still in this stage of the movie where, like, I think, again, the point is, whether you realize or not, is just keep emphasizing how dumb Tony really is. So, like, how dumb is he? And, like, where's this dumbness come from? We have that scene where they go to the country house of, like, these other, like, aristocratic people. And the conversation they have is, like, it's such a parody of a parody of a parody, but totally real thing, where they're asking him about these, like, cities he's going to build in Brazil. And that's where he's like, well, we'll build them on the plains. It doesn't make any sense. And the little lady goes, oh, what about ponchos? And they're like, ponchos? And he's like, yes, what the South American cowboys wear or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like so silly. It's like, and she goes, oh, I went to Argentina, and it's like this whole thing where they're like, oh, like, because like of our class in the empire, like we're able to travel all over the world and we think we know about it, but we don't really know anything about it because we're not paying attention and we don't care. And we're just kind of allowed to be dumb and frivolous people. So that's what we are. And like, even you can tell Susan is like, oh, this is the lifestyle I want in this house. But she, even though she's kind of wealthy herself, she's not at the same level. And she's obviously much smarter than these people. So she's like, you can see her in the corner. Like,
she doesn't seem as entertained with these.
No, she's like kind of scowling like, oh God, this is my future with Tony. Like being like
Tony's delusions of grandeur every Friday night at every party.
Right. So it's like this older generation of Tonys, like they're a little bit smarter, but not really. and it's interesting because when that scene happens, right? That scene is like a cut from, they go from Barrett's like, oh, my sister Vera's finally coming. And Tony's like, oh, okay, whatever. Then it goes to that scene. So we miss the scene where hypothetically Tony and Vera actually first meet. We don't see it. It cuts then from that scene to Tony's in the bed and he's shirtless.
In the morning. And like, that's kind of the first time they show them together.
That's the first time they show them together.
She comes in with breakfast.
Right. So it feels like a deliberate omission so that can be their first interaction on camera. Right.
Right.
Which is, again, communicates a lot right away. Her whole like acting nervous and careless. And right after that, again, because that's the funny part about the way Barrett conducts the grift, especially at this stage, is like, he's very good at it, but he knows with Tony, he doesn't have to be that careful. He can kind of be on the nose. So like a smarter person would be like, why do you keep emphasizing these things about your sister? But he does. So he's like, sir, she's wearing skirts that are too short. Like, hint, hint, have you noticed? Hint, hint.
Yeah, that was so weird. Why are you? And he said the same thing that I was thinking. Well, she's your sister. If you have a problem, like, go say something to her.
Well, it's just what I said. He knows that Tony's too stupid to really think about it. So he's just like, I'm going to tell you exactly what I want you to think.
Have you looked at my sister's legs? And then what happens when they finally make out or have the cunnilingus music playing? It's literally just shots of her legs. If you remember.
Oh yeah,
like
I was gonna get like, I joked that Tarantino's definitely watched this movie quite a lot. Back of a chair
with just the legs and feet, and you're like, oh well, now who's got a short skirt? But like, it just kind of emphasizes that like this is risque. Her legs, above her knees are showing. And there's a part of the movie in the beginning where you kind of get a feeling that he's a scoundrel because he's looking when he's in the telephone booth, when Barrett's in the telephone booth and the women are outside trying to get in onto the phone, he's staring at their ankles.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I'm like, I know that this is not a big deal, but back in the day, that meant he's a hound dog because he's looking at the ankles. And how dare you look at women's exposed calves?
Oh, exactly. That was considered, yes. You know what? So
that means that Barrett's not a good guy. And that's the first time you're like, oh, he's looking at other ladies, like suggestively, maybe his character is nefarious.
Yes. Well, so I'm really glad you brought this up because this is actually just where I even am in my notes. Like, now I have to start like talking about like the fifth layer of this movie, if you will. But I mean, like so if you're like, what? I'll just know you'll start to understand the more I go into it. But really, I think what you're seeing in these scenes like that is, though I think the specific gaze you're talking about, where he's looking at the ankles, I think you could attribute that gaze to what I call the true Barrett. But even what you're seeing in this early part of the film, as Vera comes into the picture, that's a different Barrett than we see obviously with Tony as the servant, but it's not the real Barrett either. And so this brings up this interesting question about the way this movie's constructed that I had, and I kind of finally figured it out, I think, a little bit, is the movie like deliberately manipulating the audience, almost like being unfair, like showing Barrett when Tony doesn't see him, but still not showing us everything in a way that we're almost like, why? And that's assuming you even follow along with this idea that I'm saying there's a distinction here, which I'll try to make clear. But the answer to that is, I think that he's putting on a show for Vera too. It's a different show than the one he puts on for Tony. But like, he's also kind of manipulates Vera in a certain type of way. And part of that manipulation is acting like, isn't it fun to like scheme behind the master's back? Like, this is also innocent. But really, like I said, what's distinct from the True Barrett is True Barrett doesn't give a shit about that. True Barrett's like, right. I am this is where I'm finally going to say it. And understand that, like, I don't mean this entirely literally, but part of the whole point is like, you could almost go there. Barrett's a vampire. Like, what Barrett is. Yeah.
Well, no, well, you know what? Let me interject here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I see what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're a fan of this show, but I am wildly obsessed with Taika Waititi's show, What We Do in the Shadows.
What We Do in the Shadows. Yeah.
So
I've seen the movie, not really the show.
The show is different. It's just inspired by the movie, but this is a whole nother group of vampires. And so there are different people, it's different situations. But I'm not going to tell you too much because it's such a fun show.
No, I've been meaning to watch it at some point.
I want you to watch it. At least the first season, we can maybe do a fun little, like a 10 minutes on it, because it's not something you want to dive too deep in, but it is really, really good. Mm-hmm. There is a character on that show called Colin. Mm-hmm. And Colin is a vampire, but he's in a human body because he's an energy vampire. He enjoys preying off of people who are stressed or anxious or sad, or any energy that you've got. He sucks it up, right? So he likes to go into a situation, manipulate it in the most minimal way to cause something to happen, and then just absorb all this negative energy, right? So in this instance, I think Barrett, in a similar way, is coming into this situation, manipulating it to his benefit and sucking all of those benefits dry.
100%. That nails it perfectly. I didn't know that was a thing.
I'm trying to make these connections, Marcus. I'm trying to make connections.
No. You got it. You got it. Well, like I would say that more or less describes it perfectly. And so now you have a sense of what I mean when I reference more vampire stuff. But I think there's because there's a lot more of it. Like this, I just pointed it out now so you know that when I say it later, why I'm saying it. because what I'm saying is that the true Barrett is a vampire, and I'm saying Vera, the Barrett you see with Vera, at least in that earlier part of the film, is not quite vampire Barrett. It's it's closer to it, but I would say it's a little bit distinct from it for a couple key little reasons. And I think the most important version of this is we'll get to it in a second. So the scene we got to talk about, which happens right after this, and it ties into what we're saying about Vera and the legs and the feet and stuff, is the masterpiece scene in this movie. I would say this is probably the second best scene in the movie behind the ending. The ending is just unforgettable. But this scene is the faucet scene. You know why I'm saying that?
Wait, the faucets?
So the scene where Tony eventually first hooks up with Vera, they're in the kitchen and the faucet is leaking droplets of water the whole time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And she gets on the
first
table.
it's slow, and then it starts getting faster and faster and faster. Which, by the way,
oh my gosh, I didn't even notice the faucet. But now that you
gotta notice it next time. It's because I was just thinking about perfect sound design stuff. I
was thinking about her behavior at that time.
Yeah.
She's like she's like, my skirts are too short, or like this skirt right here that I'm going to lift up a little more. She's like, you really think this skirt is too short? But now I'm putting it a little shorter.
And she goes, in a very telling line for 1963, she goes, but all the girls are wearing them like this now.
All the girls are wearing them this short. All the girls are wearing them.
Yes.
But my question is, why does she need to? Then she like puts her hand up her shirt and like scratches her chest or something. Itchy is her bra.
Again,
is itchy.
Vera, and this I don't think is even like entirely intentional. I was just gonna say Vera's not that good at like
intentional.
Yeah,
as a woman, I'm not gonna sit on a table and put my hand up my shirt.
No, sorry. I maybe didn't come through there. No, it's intentional. That's intentional. What I'm saying is that like I mean like Vera. It's interesting that Vera's working with Barrett here, and part of my theory is that Barrett's got a lot of girls. And he uses Vera specifically here because it perfectly works with what he wants to do with Tony. But part of the reason he can trust her and even be, like I said, this different Barrett with her than even the true Barrett or the Barrett with Tony is because she's like her level of unsophistication is perfect for Tony. Because like I said, Tony's dumb as shit. He can, it's better to have someone who's so blunt and forward, but like not subtle as her. That's what I meant. Not so much, it's not intentional. I mean, not subtle. She's like straight up, like touch, like, you know what I mean? Getting on the thing. It's like, but Tony, it doesn't matter. Tony's already in.
Honestly, 100% Marcus. When I was watching this, I was like, did Marcus have me watch a porno? Like, what is about to happen?
Oh God!
Because the whole first
You're
part
probably
of the
gonna have
movie
that thought a few times.
was so conservative to where like his fiance is so conservative to where like Barrett sees them kissing and she freaks out and wants him out of there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then to go to Vera climbing, sitting on a table, for some reason putting her hand up her own shirt. I'm like, where is this going?
Well, no, I'm so glad you point this out because that's kind of what I was getting to in the beginning when I was saying like, you know, one of the things about this movie that's so interesting when you watch it the first time and you're aware, like, yes, this is obviously a movie in 1963, is like, it's already being kind of transgressive for 1963, which by extension is like incredibly conservative and tame for our standards today.
Right. And you said that they were nominated for BAFTAs. And I'm like, wow. So this was like risque and they all got nominated anyway.
Yeah. Well, but they right. Which is very notable for the reason you're saying. But I'm also just pointing out the fact that like, it's like an hour and 12 minutes ish in when this happens, the scene. And it's like you said, for the first hour and 12 minutes, which is more than half the movie, by the way, I'll get to that in a second. Like it's very, very, very tame. And then all of a sudden it hits the accelerated panel. And that's not even close to the fully accelerated version still. But it's like, oh shit. They're like, and it's all, again, that pacing is very intentional. And this actually ties into the faucet because what I was saying about the faucet is it's dripping very, very slow, very, very slow, very, very slow. And then it gets faster and faster and faster and faster and faster until they fucking start making out on the table. Now, and when it does that, by the way, it does this like sort of whip pan over to them in a mirror, and you can just see it from the reflection, which again shows you the deliberate design of the mirror placement and all that. But that pacing of the faucet is the exact same pacing of the actual movie. The way the actual movie's pace is very interesting. It's like backloaded. So much happens in the last 25 minutes of the movie, whereas very little happens in the first hour and a half of the movie. And
that's what threw me at first. You know, the first 3/4 of it, I think I literally wrote this down in my notes too. I'm like, if he doesn't kill someone soon, I'm going to be really upset.
Perfect. I'm glad. See, that means the movie's working on you because the whole reason it does what it does is it wants you to basically like think you're watching a certain movie, thinking it needs to become a different movie and then give up on that. And then right as it gives up on that, it starts throwing curveballs at you.
It threw me somewhere completely different. But I was convinced, I'm like, okay, so Barrett's going to kill someone. At some point. And then Vera comes in the picture and I'm like, okay. So he knocks up her sister, and now there's drama because of that. Nope.
Right. No. So no, you're hitting the pins all exactly right. Cause like that is basically like it's giving you these signifiers so that you like think you know where the movie's going. Like, oh, okay, I guess now the movie's about this. Or I guess now this is the thing the movie's about. And it's all just to throw you off that really what this movie's about is like this total like sapping of blood of Tony. and it's like by the time he starts going there very quickly, you're like, what the fuck? It's meant to be deliberately sort of chaotic and confusing. But before I get into that, let me just kind of bring us to that point. So like I said, I just want to know the thing about the Faucet Scene. It's just like, if there was any doubt that James Fox, who plays Tony, and like I said, he's playing this Tony very good as this kind of like, again, like this dumb, this like whatever, very pompous, like insecure guy perfectly. But it's like not that impressive because it's almost like just too comical to be anything. In this scene, he gets to be really impressive and really like pathos and like, because it's just like again, use this male gaze thing as a way to communicate something very intense going on in his mind of like, the sort of like temptations and stresses that are very real to him in that moment. And so it's just great acting on his part. And obviously Sarah Miles is just like crushing it in this like very like ridiculous character, but like very effective and just using all her tools fully.
Well,
the accent,
for sure,
the eyes.
that was the other way.
Yeah.
That was the other way. I was like, okay, so he's cheating on his fiance and one of them's going to kill each other. Something like that. I was just waiting.
It's very tense. Yeah. You could hear a pin drop. I mean, you can literally hear the faucet going, but it's like, and again, way that it's just rhythm with the close-ups and the blocking and stuff. And like at one point a phone rings, and with that phone ring, it cuts to a wide shot. So it's like very throws you out of that tense close-up pacing. And then boom, you're back into it once the phone stops ringing. And it's very crazy. So that kind of brings Tony into like the next phase of the film, but it's just relatively short-lived. And it's all part of the relation. It's just like, he's like this just the sort of sex crazed Tony. He's just like that thing you've seen in other movies like this, where it's just like, or like that you think are like this, where it's just like, oh, I need you all the time. Like, let's get him out of the house even for 5 minutes so he can bone. Like, and he's like coming up with excuses. Like he's like, oh, I want brown ale. Actually, he doesn't even like it. You actually see him when he gets it. He takes one sip and then puts it away. Now, like Tony's kind of like getting caught up with Vera, and what I think is interesting about that, and you alluded to it earlier, is like the whole sort of like very fetishy way they emphasize the legs and the feet. And we have our sort of kind of legacy scene. And what I want to point out, because I mentioned, quote, liquid cocaine. Now, this is important because it comes into play later with some other things. And you're actually a drink expert of a sort. So maybe you could talk about this a little.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, well, so like back at this time, you couldn't really portray like drug use in a very flagrant way. Obviously, this movie's doing a lot of transgressive thing. And I'm not exactly sure what the literal standards in the UK were exactly then, but I know in Hollywood, in the code era, you definitely couldn't do stuff like this. And that was only just starting to be really kind of walked back from around the same time in the US. But basically, there's this idea of like, you know, back in the day, sometimes there was like liquid cocaine, and not to mention that, but you know, a substance that I think kind of plays in certainly with the sort of even gothic vibe of some of this stuff is absinthe, which I'm sure you know more about than I do. But like, I can,
if you don't mind a small interjection, I can tell you a little bit about absinthe. So, absinthe is commonly known as a quote-unquote hallucinogenic liqueur.
Yes.
It's fermented into a green color, and in the olden days, it was mixed with a drip of water onto a cube of sugar. Yeah, a cube of sugar specifically because you wanted the grains to absorb the absinthe. Literally, it doesn't do what the myths tell you that it does, and I say this as someone who went to Eastern Europe and tried some pure illegal absinthe.
Oh my God.
It was just like, it tastes like licorice. I did not feel like this was before it became legal in the US, like in 2005, 2006, 2007. I can't remember one of those years. I think it was 2007.
Probably, yeah, it had to be before 2007 because I remember the first time I had it. It could have been illegal still, but I don't think so because I remember.
But here's the thing. Yeah. Even the one that we get in the United States today that is legal is not made, it's not fermented in the same way with the wormwood as the European versions are.
Right.
And the wormwood is what's supposed to give you psychoactive is supposed to have psychoactive properties. However, I tried some with the wormwood, and it's just like regular old liqueur. It'll get you drunk, and it'll kind of soothe any digestive issues that you have. It's kind of a digestif. It's in that category of liquors. And I saw nothing. It was nothing crazy at all. But the myth, I believe, is used in the same way that it's used in this movie, which is to disguise other drugs.
Right. Okay. No, that's you.
Oh,
you nailed it. You nailed it.
Absinthe made me do it. I was just I drank the absinthe, which is very close to your beer and whiskey. So I'm not that much of a deviant.
Right. Okay. Perfect. I'm glad. Yeah. I had a feeling you'd be able to give that context for it, but that's exactly kind of why I bring it up, because my interpretation, just going off of the film, but like a lot of what you said about absinthe in particular kind of like rang true with my own like knowledge and experiences of it. And like I remember even one time, like my friends and I, we were still in high school, but that's like I think we had this store-bought absinthe set with a sugar cube, but like you said, it doesn't have the wormwood in it. I'd never had that European absinthe, but I'll take your point that like it's not as hallucinogenic as people think. But
no, not at least not for myself. Maybe somebody's body, is different than mine, and they experience it differently. But I really gave it a go, the old-fashioned way, because I wanted to know what this hype was about. I was with family at the time, so I felt safe to do that. Yeah, I was like, sure, like we're gonna when in Rome, or in this case, when in Romania.
Romania. Perfect.
So, yeah, I had to try it.
That Eastern European side of it like ties into, like I said, I think there's a sort of like folkloric aesthetic to the idea of like crazy lords and barons.
It's been romanticized in literature for so long.
Right,
and
exactly.
I think also, The Great Gatsby, I think, has nods to absinthe and that type of thing. And even now, I use American absinthe in cocktails as an additive. Not as a main ingredient, because I'm not partial to that licoricey flavor.
No, that's my one qualm. I mean, not my one, but the big qualm about it, is I can't stand that flavor. And I know a lot of like liqueurs and things have flavors like that, and it's just like
it's very specific, yes. But if you use it as a rinse, like if you rinse your glass with this, or if you spray your cocktail with it, 1 or 2 spritzes, it gives you a nice undertone of earthiness, but it's not this overpowering licorice. So just a little bit. I like to use in cocktails now and then. I wouldn't necessarily sip it or drink it straight though, because I don't think it's I don't think it's that tasty. There's so many other delicious things that you could drink.
Yeah. No, but I know I've had the experience of literally bombing it like a shot, and it was like, I'm gonna die.
Awful.
It's
medicinal at that. If you drink a whole mouthful, it's like, this tastes like medicine. This is awful.
Yeah, but no, everything you're saying, even just there, is like tying into what I was trying to get to, which is, so because of this folkloric facts and like the idea of medicine and this, it's all things that I think the servant's kind of playing with as like coded text, because yes, it has this like mythical quality and literary quality that ties into the more gothic vibe that starts to increase in the movie going forward. But also it, like, as you said, it's a convenient way, and always kind of has been, of coding in harder drugs that you wouldn't be able to do. So that's why I'm like, when I say liquid cocaine, it never says that in the movie, but I'm kind of interpreting the scene and all the overall action in the arc and being like, I think in this moment when he's sipping it and feeding it to Vera, that's what it's meant to stand in for. Right. And like, and like, this is just kind of like, and this is tied into the performance, is like, he's just like one of those guys who's just like on a weird, like cokey bender wearing like a tiny ass robe walking around like, just like, just like obsessed with this girl, and like, and he thinks he's got her eating out of the palm of his hand, but really like she's just like totally just disinterested in him, like kind of just like looking off to Barrett in the corner of the room, like, we've won. But what's kind of ironic there too is this kind of leads into the next part, which is we finally get our big confrontation, which at this point, like I'm sure you really kind of alluding to this before too, it's like, oh shit, finally shit's really popping off in this movie now, because he comes in, and I like the way that conversation starts. It's such an expertly done long scene that's moving through this house, because they come in, Tony and Susan, and they look up the stairs, and you get this amazing shot. Because at first they're just hearing Barrett and Vera, and they can tell right away, oh my God, they're like fooling around in a sexual way.
Yeah.
And they're in our room, and it's all the things at once. And Tony knows Susan's hearing it. So like the way his performance is of like that slow meltdown of just total embarrassment and shame. He
puts himself in timeout.
Puts himself in timeout, like, that type of thing. It's like this, it's so specific, like you said, what you see is when he finally get the visual part of it is he's on this banister and the door opens, so the light floods and you get this Barrett silhouette shot, and just the way that silhouette is, the fact it's all shadow, obviously,
and you can see the shadow of his smoke. I remember you see that he's
the way his posture,
yeah,
and like the fact that he's
so
clearly
comfortable and arrogant, arrogant.
The arrogance and the way he clearly sees Tony there, doesn't care. I'm like, that's the first time, and like what you'll see in the subsequent little bit, that's the first time you're seeing the real Barrett. Because I said even the so-called real Barrett that you're seeing with him and Vera is not fully the real Barrett. It's kind of like a different affectation he's doing to kind of manipulate Vera into being his collaborator, right? And so but this is just the real Barrett, where it's like, because he knows that this is a card he can play right now to play up this total humiliation of Tony, which is important for his overall plan. So he lets his real colors show, and then he fucking casually walks down and he's in his robe. And just the way that whole scene plays out, like, this is what I mean by you finally are in the real Barrett, is because the real Barrett doesn't give a fuck. He just stands there smugly, like, as Tony's like, she's your sister. She's like, oh, she's not.
Yeah, she's like, no, she's not.
I'll still get to why I think she actually really is, but we're not quite there yet. But yeah, so you obviously, that whole scene keeps going, and just like the performances of everyone, and then Vera coming in doing her sad, sappy thing, and he's like, but he's being the real Barrett, but he's still spinning this lie that's for Tony's thing. It's like, again, the first time you see the movie, and I'm curious what you think of this, it's like, I would imagine you probably assumed like, oh, this is the twist, so he's now coming clean here.
Yeah, I think I did assume that for sure.
Yeah, so it's like you think he's coming clean, like, oh, that's his cards. It's like, yes, but like what's interesting about that is there are already like weird contradictions to that, because it's like, well, why would he pretend to have it be his sister, but then like clearly also direct Vera to hook up with him, but clearly also then like, and the answer to that question is embedded in the fact that might not be super obvious the first time, is like, he knew that Tony was coming home. He wanted to get caught then and there exactly like that. And he wanted it to be like, now's my opportunity to tell you, Vera and I are getting married, which means I'm leaving here. And obviously you would fire me anyway at this point. So he knows all that, because he knows that the real game doesn't start till he comes back, but he's got to leave him for a while to make him like have that need and take Susan down with him, because
to remember how good he had it. Right. That's why he does that.
He's able to take Susan down with him, so he won't have Susan either. So Tony will be all alone. That's why the Vera thing's important, because he knows if she knows about that he cheated on her and all that shit.
Yeah, and he's holding that over. That's the power play.
Yeah, so it's really crazy. And then I think what's really interesting, because this is where the film really starts to ramp up very quickly, as you get this sequence of Tony alone in the bar and all that. But right after that, you get right back to it, where he's suddenly Barrett's there again. And hold on. I forgot one very important little thing, and you alluded to it earlier. And this is interesting, because I think I wrote in my notes that he goes and cries in Barrett's bed, but I think you're right because of where the room is. I think that's actually supposed to be Vera's room.
Vera's room, and he was like crying and smelling all the stuff and looking at the pictures and stuff.
So the one thing I'll say is, yes, I think you're right about all that, that was actually Vera's room. But remember, Vera's room is just another room for Barrett. And I think Barrett, because one thing you see is those muscle men, you were implying, oh, Vera has that. I don't think that has anything to do with Vera. Barrett put that there on purpose because this is all part of his little game. And like, it's also just for the movie symbology purposes. Like Tony missing Barrett again, it's like this man sniffing the pillow. And like, yes, you could read it as him missing Vera and sniffing Vera's pillow, which makes more sense if that's her room. But there's obviously anywhere Vera was laying is where Barrett was laying too.
That's where Barrett was also.
So like, there's this
sure.
very like sort of, again, homoerotic kind of confusion starting to go into Tony. And I'm saying that Barrett is deliberately playing that. And that's why he left those like muscle men guys there. Which is, get it, because I don't think it's necessarily, well, I'll get where the scene where it really kind of codes it in there more directly. But it's like, so yeah, you get there and then you reinsert Barrett into the story. And what I love about this scene, and I'm sure you probably thought this even on the first time, is like, even though you don't know where it's going yet, Barrett's little sad sap story about how he got played by Vera.
She broke my heart too.
So like, dude, this is con artist. You're a Mark 101. Like, how have you not heard of this one?
Where have you been?
It's like, and it's just really emphasizes again just how dumb Tony is, but also just how desperate he is, because he's just like, you mean you'll come back? Like he doesn't care how stupid and unbelievable this story is. Like,
well, luckily, Tony's an idiot, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't matter.
Like,
I think he could have given even a worse story and got away with it.
Right. Exactly. So, no, what I find so funny about this is what really interesting, the way the movie does this, when I say the pacing just really ratchets up here and it's very intentional, is it cuts right from this scene where Barrett reinserts himself into the story and gets this little sad sap thing. And like I said, he's acting super vulnerable and sad sappy to lure Tony back in. And then it's like hard cut right into the next scene where all of a sudden he's back at the house. And now it's like a completely different Barrett, and it's very jarring. And that's intentional. It's like, now
like
Barrett's
Dr.
like
Jekyll,
wearing,
Mr. Barrett.
Yeah, he's wearing, but he's not fully true Barrett yet. But he's like, now he's just moving very swiftly along, because like he basically has Tony in checkmate, and it's just like, I've now just got to go through the motions, more or less. Is like, but it's very deliberate motions, at least for the next couple scenes, where he's immediately in this casual attire. He's wearing the black turtleneck, and he's like, his hair's messy now, so he's not trying to put on any of the airs of being a servant at all anymore. And he's just like, it's like the way I look at it, and like the way the scene just thrusts you right into that action with no, like, almost like as a non sequitur, just very chaotic. It's like, whoa. It's kind of like now the way Barrett's playing Tony is it's like a bad romance thing. It's like he's like that wife or girlfriend character is just like, oh, I'm kind of like being very passive aggressive towards you in this very cheeky way. And it's like immediately goes into like, but like, it's this psychological abuse thing. It's all about him just like kind of subtly gaslighting him at every little step. From
slowly, yes.
And he getting him liquored up. Like he keeps pouring the drinks and stuff. And it's like just every little thing he says, like every line, every action is like this reversal. It's like a dare. It's like this, just subtle, slow burn thing where it's like warping reality almost. Like it's very like even now, even though I know this is gonna happen, it's like it really does feel like you just step behind the curtain and you're in like an alternate reality immediately, like because it's just the way that it's designed.
Oh, absolutely. You're like, wait, what just happened?
And it's all about like bringing Tony closer and closer to becoming the hollow husk he's at the end. And a way to think of this, and this is what's really sinister, because this is a more modern conception of a behavior, but it's like Barrett is grooming Tony, like, and he's grooming him not to be like his like, like, because that term's often now apply to like, the way a pedophile grooms like a kid. It's more like,
I also think that that's the way that people who get catfished are catfished also. Like it's gradual,
right,
over time, a little bit by little bit, and see, you push the boundaries a little more and see how much further you can get away with whatever. And I think that's what Barrett is doing. He's testing the boundaries, and it keeps going further and further into what Tony allows and to what Tony concedes.
Yeah.
You know?
No.
And that's literally like the definition of grooming a person. But like, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, this is where I toss in again, like before I get into the full kind of like explainer on it, like a little bit more of this vampire, because what he's grooming Tony to kind of be his like blood concubine. Is like he comes like a Dracula bride. He's like, right now I'm just grooming you so that you can just be my blood bag.
Oh, yeah,
that
so
like
creepy.
Feed from, you know, like just freely feed from. You're not even a person anymore. You're just a bag of blood for me to suck. Right? So this is also like when each scene, it's like a little bit further in the progression, like the house begins that transformation from this phase 2 of like it just being like in total disarray because Tony's been living alone without Barrett or Susan to being the final form where it's like Barrett's house, right? So it's just like so one thing you'll notice is that's very particular that I thought was cool is there's a scene where you see like this painting that's in Barrett's quarters because Barrett's still living in that quarters upstairs. And it's different now. You see like the black paint and stuff, but it goes right from there to in the next scene, it's in the living room. So it's like Barrett's moving stuff from his quarters into the living room. Very, very smart. Like
I never noticed that.
Yeah, it's just in the background. No one says anything.
Wow.
But if you pay attention, which again, I've watched this movie so many times.
That is so symbolic.
Yeah,
obviously.
I could just I immediately notice little things like that because they're the new things for me to see. But yeah, so then like what's great too is like this because that scene's followed up by the scene where and this is like kind of where I feel like the switch finally completes, right? Is they're doing that stair and ball scene, like where they're throwing the ball up the stairs, and you'll notice that Barrett and Tony are wearing matching clothes now. They're wearing matching clothes. They continually wear matching clothes. But they're wearing like matching flannel shirts and like pants. So very casual. And they're just throwing the ball up and down. And Tony just
Why did I not notice the outfit? I normally notice things like that.
It's black and white. It's harder to notice wardrobe things.
I guess. I mean, maybe.
A little bit. I'll give you that. But he's
I don't really good with costume stuff. That's nuts.
I know, but it's like what I find funny about the ball game and like just the way it's shot with the angle is really cool. But and the way the whole film uses that staircase is in shot design is perfect. But like, it's funny because like I mentioned the whole frat boy thing. This is the full version of this frat boy fantasy. Like, because
throwing around balls in the house.
Yeah, the way Barrett
wearing matching outfits.
Exactly, matching outfits, throwing the balls. And it's like the way Barrett kind of like is able to do this is really, he's actually giving Tony what he wants. It's like not what he's supposed to want, but it is what he wants. Like, oh, you want the frat boy fantasy? Well, then we are equals, right? And like, we just get drunk all day and play stupid games recklessly and break furniture. Like, so like, that's what you wanted. And that's in that fashion. It's like, oh, eventually they have to be like, well, someone's got to clean the house and like, we'll make the pledge do it. But the thing is, Barrett's not the pledge. Tony is. And this is the scene where he lets him know.
Tony is. Yeah.
So like the dialogue, it's like perfect reversal dialogue. So, cause like he breaks something and like Tony starts yelling at him. He's like, you should clean it up. And Barrett, and he goes like, you're a servant. You have to. And Barrett goes, it's like I'm not a servant. He's like, I'm no servant. I do everything around here. He starts listing all the things that he does, which are literally servant's duties, but he's saying them in the context of like, that's why I'm not the servant. It's like perfect reverse psychology. And then Tony like completely caves and goes, well, I don't know. It's like maybe just like pour some, like I'll pour us a brandy. And then
he's like, you're gonna pour the brandy, right?
Tony, like basically Barrett tells Tony to pour the brandy, and he's like, I will, okay. So now Barrett's telling Tony to do the chores for him, and it's like the whole thing is complete. It's amazing. It's like, but Tony literally says right before that, I don't know what I'd do without you.
I don't know where I would be, what I would do, or something. I'm like, oh.
So he's completely like the switches happen. And then the next scene is where we get the sort of and this is important because it's like Barrett's like last layer of manipulation on Tony is like this sort of what I would consider the finalization of this coding, that there's like this subtly like a gay or bi-curious thing going on, because he says to him, Barrett saying to him like, oh, it's like, don't worry, Tony, it's like, I get this feeling we were old pals once. And he's like, I've never had that feeling except when I was in the Navy. And Tony goes, that's funny. I had the same feeling too. And the last time I had it was in the Army. It's like when you like look at the lines very plainly, it's very like, like one time I hooked up with a dude and it was in the military, which is where just historically, traditionally, a lot of that stuff happens, right?
Yeah.
And it also, like, again, if I'm using the frat boy metaphor of like this college context, again, that college experimentation. And to be clear, I don't think it's like they ever hook up or that is all Barrett's interest. It's simply just the last
for him to gauge a reaction.
Yeah, to make Tony feel like, oh, Barrett really is everything I need. He'll even love me like that if I just do whatever he says. I don't need Susan, who will never come back, or even though she does.
She does.
Right, but we'll get to that in a second. But it's like also literally interesting too is the next scene, because the scene order is really interesting, is the scene where they're playing hide and seek, and the way that's shot is very tight close-ups with the shadows. It's very like new wave horror style. And Barrett's like, what he's saying is like, you've got a guilty secret. You've got a guilty secret. So it's like the previous scene like gets him to like admit some gay stuff basically, and then the next scene he's like, you get in the closet, you have the guilty secret. So it's another way for him to manipulate him. He's like, you told me the truth. I'll tell other people if you don't like do what I say. Right. Again, it's all very like subtle at this point. And then we get, and the next thing leading us towards our finally at ending is we get Vera's return. Before we get Susan's return, we get Vera's return. And what's interesting about this is going along with everything I was saying about the way Barrett manipulates Vera, but the way Vera's obviously totally in on it.
Yeah, she was aware the whole time.
Yeah, it's like, so Vera's like in the same way Barrett was like, oh, I came back into Tony with the sob story. Basically, Vera does the same thing. It's amazing. Again, Tony's already pretty weakened at this point, but we already know even before that weakening, he's just this dumb guy, truly, who would fall for this every time. It's like, she's like, oh, but actually Barrett manipulated me, which is more true, but still it's not the actual truth because she's totally in on it. She's like, he's manipulating me, and oh, like I'm also pregnant. Oh, like this whole thing. And like the way Tony responds to it is really what's important, because Tony's just like, again, puts himself in timeout. I love that you came up with that. That's exactly what it is. He's just like can't react because he's just totally in the thrall of Barrett. And it's like, by doing that, it's kind of like this last shot of like, it's giving Tony a problem and then making Tony feel just like totally helpless, which makes him even feel more helpless or act more helpless. And that's the purpose. And also gives now Vera
makes him think he's not capable. Just reminds him that, hey, remember, you're not capable.
Exactly.
You need me.
And it gives Vera a free pass now to come back into the house at free will, which again is what reveals when you see her attitude there. It's like she's not in this sad place at all. Now, I do think it is like, this is where I finally get to the whole point about me saying about they're really brother and sister. I do think that Barrett has this control over her that's not necessarily like, even-handed. And I do think it's because I think even the whole line, if you take the whole line, why does he like the whole, oh, she's my sister, but she's not thing? It's like later on, he says, after that grift's been exposed, he's like, oh, little sis. So to me, I'm like, you could just say he's just referencing that false role. But to me, I don't think so. To me, I think that once we see the true Barrett, this is absolutely a guy who would sleep with his sister without question and just use her as freely. He's completely amoral. Maybe
we can hope that it's a half sister.
Yeah, but like it's just like
at the minimum.
That's my point is I can't put it past him. I can't put it past him.
Cutthroat.
Truly. So I'm just like, yeah, if she's his sister, he wouldn't give a fuck. So she might as well be. And I think it's totally plausible that she is really what it comes down to. So again, now we get to this like scene, this last scene before the climax, which is also to me what solidifies the vampire aspect of it and the drug aspect is
right.
Sitting
and you
with,
mean like what, like the way that I mean it, like emotional vampire.
I do mean it more in this metaphorical sense, but I think
right.
the point is that like the metaphor
maybe they do live
like,
forever, just conning people forever and ever and just never show the blood part.
Right, exactly. My point is like I treat it like a metaphor, but you can't rule it out, like, which is why it's so clever. Is like because you might just not see it. He might turn into a bat off screen. Like you don't know. So he's sitting with Tony and he's like, "Oh, here, have the drink." And the drink looks particularly blood red, which is totally different than the very absinthe look of the previous drink that I was talking about. And I'm just like, yeah, it could be wine or brandy, but based off the way Barrett's feeding it to him and the context of the scene, the way Tony starts behaving immediately after, I'm like, this is code for now.
Some kind of drugs, right?
Yeah, I think
there's no way he would act like that otherwise.
Yeah, I think it's code for like, you know, like a liquid codeine or liquid heroin or like just code for straight up shooting up, really. Is like, and that's exactly what someone like Barrett would do to Tony at this stage. It's like, yeah, you should just be totally out of it. And
docile.
Numbing your pain. And that's all you can do now is just numb your pain. And that idea of, you know, if you think heroin and the injection stuff makes sense with the bite and the blood. And that's what I'm saying with all that kind of connects it. And there's a very particular line here in this scene where, you know, Tony's mumbling, blah, blah, blah. And Barrett just freely says this as he's like trying to get him to drink. He's like, "I'm only human, sir. Otherwise you wouldn't have let me in." And I'm like, oh, shit.
Wouldn't have let me in?
Yes. He says, "I'm only human. Otherwise, you never would have let me in." I'm like, that's straight up vampire talk. Straight up. So
it really is.
Yeah. So I'm like, that's the line to me that like is like, again, taking the wink and nod and winking really hard now. It's like, hey, Barrett is basically a vampire. Like you can make of that what you will, but that's the idea.
Well, if you take that approach and just assume that they're omitting all of the violence and all of the gore and just showing us what Tony's point of view is, that makes sense. Maybe he is.
It also makes sense if you just take your energy vampire idea, because maybe he doesn't do any physical violent thing, but it's like he sucks that energy and feeds off of it, like in that way.
Well, if you look at it that way, you could say, hypothetically, these two go throughout time from place to place and pull this grift. And they're just really good at it now. They're just really good at it now at finding someone who is a good target, moving in, taking over, sucking him dry. I mean, maybe they just skipped it and this is a vampire movie.
I mean, I think like a part of the other reason I suggest this is the way it's shot in these last few scenes is shot like it's a vampire movie. Like the whole design of Barrett's, like I said, Barrett's true castle, as I call it, is this dark black painted Gothic castle. Like it's like, and even the like I said, the sex and the swinging and the orgy stuff is still like coded along the lines of like, it's very hip and modern and commenting on this, that culture, but it's like, it's also relates to that Bram Stoker vision of like Dracula having like 7 brides, and see what I'm saying? Like it's taking multiple influences and multiple levels of like interpretation and purposely tying them together so that you can get one of them or all of them, but either way it's there. And I'm trying to speak to all of them the best I can, or at least all the ones I can give you. But yeah, that brings us to the final sequence, which to me is the best part of the movie. And this starts with Susan coming back, because Susan shows up at the house, or like right as even she rings the door, this is giving us a little hint of like what's to come / like what the situation's been. Is like Barrett immediately makes reference like, "Oh, ladies are coming again tonight." Again, like, you know, oh, we have like this is what he's been doing. He's like guilting, shaming Tony about like having sex with these prostitutes or whatever. He's like, "Oh, another one for you, sir," like type of thing. But like Tony's literally like moving like Gollum around his chair while Barrett's standing up with his back straight wearing a smoking jacket. So he's like acting like in this very funny way, like, oh yeah, you're the owner of the house, of course. They're coming for you, sir. And they are, in terms of like Barrett using them on Tony. But Tony's the one, man, like totally in control. That's his house now. And it looks like his house now because the set transformation's complete now. So he's like, he goes, opens the door, and it's Susan there. And obviously Susan, she's there because, as you said before, it's like, oh, I got contacted by Vera and I need to tell Tony. And it's all about this shit. But as the scene goes on, you realize the scene doesn't care about any of that because none of the characters really do. And something else is going on here. And then all like the prostitutes show up. And it's like funny because it just like the way it's shot in this very like new wave disorienting way just really emphasizes like with all the close-ups and stuff, like this like weird like psychedelic kind of gothy party. And I just love the look and vibe of it. Like I'm kind of like, this is like something so interesting, especially at the time. And it's just great to look at. It's like they have the cameras there, so it's got that photo shoot element, but also like that snuff film element. It's like you don't know what's gonna happen. Like you're like, what are they doing in here? Barrett just roaming around the smoking jacket, right? And the one main prostitute, notice that the one that's quote for Tony is the old looking one, because it's that mother fantasy or that mother thing that he says is in his fantasy, but of course he's powerless against it. And so she's like putting him in his lap, and he's just like, ugh. And Susan's looking at this like, what the fuck is happening? Because she hasn't been in the movie the last 40 minutes. She's like, where did this go? Where the hell did this go? This is nuts. And look, like, as you mentioned about Susan, like the way she was portrayed in the beginning of the movie is like she has this very sort of uptight, prudish demeanor. So you would think like she'd be balking at all this. And she kind of is. But what happens in this scene, and this is why this scene is the ending and the climax, is because it's like Tony's already lost, but it's just like, let's see how this impacts someone else that's been in the movie. And it's like, Susan's looking around. It's like, if you can't beat them, join them. Because I don't know what's happening right now. Because I can't even talk to Tony. So in other words, she goes up to Barrett and starts kissing him.
Yeah.
And that's like Barrett's ultimate, like, I am the lord of like all this. I got you. Even the woman who hates me wants me now because she has like, you know what I mean? It's like this, it's insane
power.
thing.
I have the power.
And it like, you know, it kind of like, it's kind of like this weird push-pull going thing on. The only thing that stops it and stops the whole scene is Tony's like in his like weird daze. He's looking around. There's a great shot that like a close-up that I've used in like I've referenced in material a bunch of times because it's one of my favorite shots. And all of a sudden it starts cutting to all these close-ups of the prostitutes like looking at him and laughing at him. Ah! And that like snaps him just because of the pure overwhelming like shame of it. He's like, get out of here, all of you, get out of here. But it's not like he takes back any control. Like Barrett immediately makes it like, yeah, you all get out of here, get out of here, get out of here, get out of here. Like, oh yes. And Susan's like the last to leave, and she goes out, she starts crying. It's a sad thing, but the movie doesn't end there. The oldest prostitute, like I said, that mother lady comes down the stairs. She's the last to leave. Tony's still at the top of the stairs. And Barrett, like I said, goes to her, oh, come back tomorrow. So, you know, it's just going to keep going. And the movie ends with
this toxic cycle.
Exactly. It's going to keep going. The movie ends with Barrett turning off the lights, and you just see Tony like just totally like again, like a blood bag, like
a zombie,
sinking to the ground, like a zombie, completely sinks down to the ground. And the last thing you actually see is the clock because the camera pans down to it. And I can't really explain that per se. Because there's not really, the movie's not really about time or anything, but it works as a final shot. And like, ooh, man, it's one of those things. Oh, I forgot that Susan does slap Barrett on her way out. But it's it's this futile exercise. Like he doesn't even care because it's like, that's the thing. He's already won. It doesn't matter. It's all in futility. But yeah, so that's The Servant. You know, it's this very wild film. I'm really glad like I got you to see it, and like I think that was the reason I wanted to outline all that stuff, is because it's like, now you know when you watch it again, like kind of what to look for. And there's
a lot of stuff I missed for sure.
Yeah, no, totally. But all right, we can. I want to give you a chance to kind of make any like final notes and statements on it. But I think we're about ready to wrap up.
I think that's all I've got for this one. We hit all the bases, and if I get to watching it again, I've got a lot of things to look for.
I'm gonna keep working my way through this Dirk Bogarde playlist, because really, I mean, shout out to him. He's unfortunately been dead now for quite some time, but what an amazing career. Like, I if you're going to get quote typecast, which I would reject that framing, except I'm using it just out of convenience right now. Being typecast, at least for my film taste, as con artist or Nazi is like, that's great for me. That means I'm going to watch all your movies. you know? And so I really think there's a very sort of deep thing that he was able to tap into, and ditto what Pinter and Losey did. Like I was giving that context about Losey and the Blacklist and stuff, and it's like there's it takes a very particular set of circumstances to like be willing to be in a position to be like, shit, I've already lost. I think that's true of Pinter, not less so of Pinter, but certainly true of Losey and Bogarde. Like they'd already kind of been on the forced to the outside of the industry, so that kind of gave them the credence to like, let's try bold things. Let's do innovative things. Let's push the boundaries, because we're already being pushed to the outside. So it's like, we have nothing to lose really. And I think that's boldness is what led to the fucking just absolute, like literally top 5 of all time movies for me is this movie. Mm-hmm. I come back to it constantly. I can't get enough of it. It has such an impact on like how I see movies and what movies can be. And like, a lot of the other movies that I would even put above it, I feel like owe a lot to it. So it's like, it's quite important. That's it. I'm glad it's finally getting the shine it deserves because of things like Criterion Channel. And that's the word, I'd say.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah.
All right, Dana.
Well, okay, my friend.
Get some women, take them to the Peachtree Dams. I say get liquored up and take them to the Peachtree Dams.
Do you know what I mean? You know why? It's a scary thing to give to a guy like me. Do you know what I mean?
I say get liquored up and take them to the Peachtree Dams.
Do you know what I mean?
I say get liquored up and take them to the Peachtree Dams. Get liquored up and take him to the Peachtree Dams.
Do you know what I mean? You know why? Final cut. It's a scary thing to give to a guy like me.